Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is an everlasting flame in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, Azure Gleam Evolution at Arianrhod. As far as sieges went, the assault to reclaim Arianrhod had been going as well as could be expected. The Silver Maiden was well fortified, built to fend off massive armies, and it had shown its might. Even when penetrated from within, the fortress had managed to hold back the overwhelming might that the Empire had deployed for quite some time now. It was in no small part due to the exemplary leadership of the Knights of Syros, as well as Miklon. Dimitri's heart panged somewhat at the thought of the man. While the man was far from a role model, he was an ideal general. He had proven himself time and time again in battle, and his only wish was that the man had not been pushed into a life of brigandry by his lack of a crest. Steel clashed around him and soldiers fought as he forced his way forwards, and his tumultuous thoughts moved with Eridbar. The voices of the dead, in this regard, were quiet. He was unsure if Miklon's voice would join them after this battle. Despite his misgivings about Miklon's character, he was still a renowned general and Sylvain's brother, even if the two had not been on good terms. They had managed to defeat Gwendol the Grey Lion, the commander in charge of this assault. It had not been an easy battle. The man had clung to life desperately, and fought with the vigor of a man a third his age. However, the tides would turn once he went down and Thunder Catherine rejoined the kingdom army, or so he thought. As they fell under ambush yet again, this time by Count Hevering, his son, Linhard von Hevering, and a scion of Count Rowe, a man known as Yuri Leclerc, they found the tides shifting in the Empire's favor once more. With their forces scrambled and scattered, it was difficult to regain control over the battlefield, but thanks to a little help from Shay, they were able to regroup enough to mount a successful counter-attack against the invading forces. After forcing a surrender from Yuri and a retreat from Count Hevering and his son, it felt as though the battle might be close to over. All that was left was Edelgard, her Imperial Majesty. However, all things were not set to go according to plan. "Why, Your Majesty? I have grave news. We are under a triple-pronged attack." Dimitri's eyes snapped to the messenger, a foot soldier with a wide-brimmed hat. At his side, Sylvain and Shay both grit their teeth. "With what troops? Is the majority of the army not with Edelgard?" "And no, Your Majesty. The forces are divided evenly between the Emperor and the son of Duke Agir. But from the west, it appears that a band of mercenaries have breached the walls. The Ashen Demon is among them, sir." Dimitri's eyes went wide. "The Ashen Demon? No, why now? We were so close." Damn, anger flared in his heart. The Ashen Demon, the man known as Byleth. He could very well roll over all of their commanders and stifle their assault in moments, especially with how exhausted they were. At his side, Shay grabbed his arm. "Hey, what's that look for? I'll go handle him. You just worry about Edelgard, and I'll make sure that he stays out of your hair." The woman seemed confident, but Dimitri still found himself hesitating. "Sylvain, send the bulk of our troops with her. I'll face Edelgard alone. You rally whoever you can find to face Ferdinand." Although their stint at the academy was brief, Dimitri did remember some of his classmates vividly. Ferdinand von Agir was one such classmate, boldly and loudly proclaiming his heritage and title to anyone who would listen. He was much like another student in that way, but the only thing that Dimitri could remember of Lawrence Hellman Gloucester aside from his horrendous haircut was his pompous voice. Ferdinand, on the other hand, had been incredibly deft with a spear, and had almost managed to push Dimitri back on occasion. In a situation like this, he had no doubt that Ferdinand's skills in command may rout more than a few of their allies. The only thing he could rely on was himself. He knew full well his own capabilities, and he would cut them all down for what they had done. Not to mention, there were questions that he needed answered from that woman. His mind would not rest until he heard her words. Sylvain seemed incredibly less enthused about this idea. "Your Highness, I don't know how good of an idea that is. You know how strong Edelgard is. I can hold out until reinforcements arrive. We do not have time to be arguing, Sylvain," he snapped, his grip on Eridbar's handle tightening until even the umbral steel seemed to creak under his hands. His friend frowned, then snagged Dimitri's arm, pulling him up onto the horse he rode. "I'll get you there in a flash, Your Kingliness." Don't push too far out there. They rode through Arianrhod, occasionally directing allies. Felix looked particularly displeased, and it was only Rodrigue's firm hand that kept him from chasing after the pair. As they rode, trepidation rose in his heart. His worries seemed to compound with every clop of the horse's hooves, and the voices that plagued him only seemed to whisper ever louder in his ear. They begged him to kill her, told him that she was the one who caused the tragedy, insulted her, and railed against his own psyche all the while. He wasn't sure if he was in any shape to fight anyone, let alone Edelgard as well as the Ashen Demon. Until finally, after a scant few minutes of riding, he saw her. Her cloak seemed to catch the rising sun, the deep red hue instantly noticeable in the early morning hours. Her white hair, freckled with blood not her own, drew the eye, and her sheer presence on the battlefield could not be denied. Even from a distance, he found himself wondering how a girl as kind as Elle had become the type of monster who could bathe in blood and stand tall during it. They locked eyes, and Dimitri burst from the horse, Eredbar in his hands as he leapt to strike. Edelgard wound back her axe, preparing to respond in kind. In this moment, the voices always went eerily silent. In the moment where he anticipated the most bloodshed, the most pain, that was when they were appeased, and his mind knew peace. Eredbar slammed into the ground, stone and dirt erupting towards Edelgard. Sylvain hastily kicked his horse and fled the scene in a mere instant. It was perhaps his smartest decision of the day, because Edelgard immediately retaliated, her speed almost unmatched even in her heavy armor as her axe broke ground to strike at him, flames dancing around the holy weapon. Eredbar once more struck the ground, this time drawing on Dimitri's meager reserves of magic. Ice erupted from the ground, and he winced as he felt the staff of the hero's relic quiver in response. He had almost overextended the weapon today. He had one final trick up his sleeve, but the ice served its purpose. It entangled Edelgard's feet, forcing an end to her unwavering assault. She struggled for but a moment before lowering her center of gravity and raising her shield, knowing full well what was to come, and she predicted correctly. His lance struck her with a terrible might, one ingrained in him at birth, and her shield somehow managed to hold strong despite it all. As he raised his arm to strike once more, however, another axe came down towards his side, and he was forced to back off. A wyvern rider and 2 fortress knights, all 3 commanders, now blocked his way to Edelgard, and with a burst of flame, she was free from the ice he had trapped her in. He gripped Eredbar more firmly as he evaluated his situation. It would be difficult for him to hold out here. His battalion had not come prepared for such a gruesome battle. Although he led them well, most were exhausted or dead by this point, and all of Edelgard's troops were in fighting form, if not somewhat weary from a harsh march. He knew he was strong, but Edelgard was just as powerful as he was, if not more so. It didn't help that her axe held a natural advantage over his lance. "There is nothing more that can be said between us, Dimitri." "I suppose not. If we must fight, then I will fight with all I have." And that was exactly what he did. Trying to fight against Edelgard and her commanders would normally be considered suicide, even for him, but in the back of his mind, he felt that this was a fight that he could win. After all, his allies were fighting an even more impossible war, and they had managed to hold every stronghold of importance so far. With that fresh perspective in mind, he gripped Eredbar with renewed vigor and leapt into the fray. He felt more fired up than ever. His body almost glowed with a blue light as he fought with all he had. The 3 commanders were nothing to scoff at. The fortress knights fought together well, and the wyvern rider oppressed him from above. On top of that, Edelgard led a frankly absurdly overwhelming charge against him. It was tough to even find purchase in a battle such as this one, and yet, he prevailed, finding nick after nick in their armors, rushing towards the weakened ones with a strength that he had not felt in quite some time. However, eventually, his luck had to run out. The wyvern rider got a lucky hit on him, tearing through his armor and leaving a light scrape. That jar in concentration was enough for Edelgard, whose axe struck out in a flash, sending waves of flame his way. His nostrils flared as a fresh wave of pain overwhelmed his mind. The smell of charred corpses, the bodies, the screaming. Except this time, there was a form standing in front of him, sword flying in a flash and redirecting the attack with ease. His grip was tight on Eredbar, as though it was the only thing that was real in that moment. His eyes dilated, and he stared at that figure. Glenn, Is that? And then they turned, and he locked eyes with Catherine. His delusions seemed to ramp up in that instant, Glenn's face overlapping with her own, and he blinked a few times, everything somewhat disoriented. King Dimitri, we're here to help. We won't let this witch take your head. Before he could ask who we referred to, an arrow coated in ice sailed into the body of the wyvern, and it roared in pain. In a panic, the rider jumped to the ground, but Catherine was upon them in a flash, far faster than either Edelgard or her fortress knights could react. The man was cut down in an instant, and the three opponents scrambled to move. Know that no one has faced Thunderbrand Catherine and lived to tell the tale. I'll be your opponent. King Dimitri, you should retreat and tend to your wounds. We'll handle this here. Catherine's voice was proud and boasting, but he could see from how her arm quivered that most of it was simply for show. He had to marvel at Gwendel's strength for pushing such a powerful woman so far. Edelgard's lilac eyes narrowed, determination filling her entire posture. I'll cut down anyone who gets in my way, without mercy. Staring into those eyes, he couldn't help but believe her fully. He shook his head, clenching Eredbar. No, Catherine. I'll face Edelgard, alone. There are things which I must know, and until I can ask, then that woman is going nowhere. Edelgard scoffed and lifted her axe once more. Catherine just sighed. Well, don't complain too much if we make it a fair fight. 3 on 3 is better than 1 on 3, right, kid? Dimitri scowled, but had no choice to acquiesce as Edelgard spoke. I won't let the two of you die. Despite the simplicity of the words, it seemed to rejuvenate the fortress knights. Catherine leapt into the fray with bolts of lightning following her every strike, and from behind a hail of arrows rained down upon the enemy. Dimitri himself locked blades with Edelgard, who seemed intent on overwhelming him with superior strength. Despite her smaller stature, she possessed immense strength, and occasionally, he would see the flash of a crest. Did the crest of Ceros truly give so much power? Eredbar fired out rapidly, the weapon repeatedly slamming into her shield and sending waves of electricity across it. He swept the lance across her guard wide and slammed it down from overhead, watching with a ferocious grin as she recoiled from the strength of the blow. With a wide, sweeping blow of her own, however, he was forced to retreat once more. Back and forth, they danced, the metal ringing out in a cacophony that would put any opera house to shame. As they locked blades once more, Dimitri forced his hand, leaning in close and slamming his own forehead against hers. She recoiled, shooting him the dirtiest look he had ever seen her give. I see the moniker of Boar is well deserved, she hissed, sending another wave of flame his way. This time, however, he was mentally prepared for it, his lance sweeping out and dispelling the flames against his armor harmlessly. It even felt somewhat comforting as the warmth licked his ear. Still they fought, rampaging through the streets and demolishing the walls of Arianrhod until finally, they ended up in a wide open space. There were no more soldiers around them, but they were definitely still within the confines of Arianrhod. They had returned to the entrance. It was only upon realizing this that he realized that they had abandoned Catherine and Shamir long ago. He huffed as they separated once more, Eredbar singing in his hands. The crest stone seemed to flare within it, and he forced himself to calm his raging thoughts. Edelgard glanced back at Arianrhod, and her usually impassive facade cracked, if only just a little bit. With a small sardonic grin on her face, she stared him directly in the eyes and raised her weapon once more. I surrender. Now read me my last rites or let me go. His eyes narrowed. I am sorry, but you cannot be allowed to leave just yet. She chuckled. The thought of killing me never even crossed your mind, huh? Well, that makes this easier. When she charged at him this time, he got the sense that she meant it, for perhaps the first time in this battle. She truly wanted him dead. He raised Eredbar and tried to quell the voices rattling around in his head, telling him that he should absolutely kill her, to kill the woman that had killed her own mother for personal gain. No, I'm going to lead this time. You just have to watch. His breath caught in his throat, and despite the overwhelming attack coming his direction, he still managed to find his footing. His body shifted ever so slightly enough to offset the brunt of the axe swing. Her heart was in it this time, and fighting it with sheer power would be difficult. Elle had always been a sheer force of nature. Oh okay. So I move, like this. The axe skirted off of his breastplate, and a wave of flame rushed over his head. Eredbar twirled in his hands as her follow-up came racing down his unprotected left side. You're supposed to put your hands here, D. You're a boy, so you should know how to do this stuff by now. He would never be able to get Eredbar to strike in such close quarters. She would cut him down before he could. In lieu of that, his fist swung out clumsily, barely tilting his body enough to avoid the axe and slamming a massive amount of force into her shield, raised at just the last moment. He ignored the pain that suddenly erupted into his hand. If he weren't wearing gauntlets, that certainly would have broken his hand. Okay, you won't step on my toes, right? Promise me. Elle's face had a grim determination set to it. Eredbar slammed into the ground once more, aimed specifically to interrupt her footing. Lightning crackled across the blow, dancing across the ground in a beautiful way. Oh okay, I promise. So, what now? Dimitri raised his lance, swiping off to the side and leaping into the air, tossing it to the ground again and again, forcing her backwards once, twice, thrice. Now, we just follow the pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3 ow. Hey, you promised not to step on my toes. Wipe that gleeful smirk off of your face. It'll take more than this to take me down. Elle snarled, and he found himself surprised. He hadn't even known that he was smiling. One more time, D, and be careful this time. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really just that simple. Follow my lead, and then you can go, okay. Elle's axe exploded outwards in a horrifically powerful show of might, her flames scorching the ground and raking bloody lines across Dimitri's armor. With a relentless assault of flame, she launched a final attack in his direction, the sheer force of the strike causing wind to billow in every direction and for Eredbar to almost be knocked from his hands. With a resolute frown, Elle continued to attack, but he wouldn't let her take the initiative anymore. Eredbar reeled back, and he finally executed the one art he had been holding back for this very moment. Eredbar, wreak atrocity across them. As though the goddess herself had blessed his lance, his crest activated and the lance fired outwards, the explosive power far greater than what Elle had just put out. Hurriedly, she slammed her shield in front of her, hunkering down before it, but that wasn't the true purpose of the attack. Now, D, whenever you finish a dance, you have to do a flourish, okay? Girls will like it more if you're cool, so you have to be both graceful and cool at the same time. Atrocity could very well have broken her shield outright. It very well could have killed her, if she reacted poorly. But this was Elle, he would never be able to kill her even if he gave her his best. So, as the power subsided before it ever even reached her, Eredbar snaked out and slammed against the side of her shield, sending it scattering to the ground. Elle stared up at him, eyes wide, as the metal clanked to the ground and he raised Eredbar to her once more. The bottle of a concoction clattered as he tossed it to the side, his wounds healing rapidly. It was a good memory. But that doesn't change what is in front of me. I can't let the visions of the past affect me in the present. Elle's surprise simmered into something more calm after a moment. It seems you are the victor in this fight. I'll have to bid you farewell. The somewhat startled look on her face before had confirmed something for him. She had not expected him to win. In fact, she had expected his unconditional loss. Perhaps that was why. No escape. Dimitri roared, charging towards her once more even as she turned to flee. If she falls here, I can save my kingdom. I can end this war, save the church, save my people. But, why can't I? Ah, indeed, this moment will be the doom of you both. And the ground shook as dark magic swept across the clearing, knocking them both off of their feet. Elle seemed to be the first to recover, standing up to full and glaring towards the source of the voice. Thales. That dark magic, it had felt familiar. Shay, one of his commanders, and a mercenary technically in his employ, she used a power very similar to that one. And yet, staring at the darkly dressed pale man across from them, he got a feeling far dissimilar from one of his most trusted friends. The man Thales smiled sinisterly, and although Eredbar was too fragile to be performing any powerful combat arts at the moment, he still raised it in preparation for another battle. Dear Edelgard, it has been far too long. Well done with her, King Dimitri. Elle's breath caught in her throat, and when she turned to look at him once more, she had the look of a rabbit trapped in a cage. Is it so? Have you truly found an ally in Dimitri? His anger built in a moment. What manner of trickery is this? Edelgard, who is this man? Somehow, the look on her face eased, her cornered expression melting to relief. So you are not allies? That would make more sense. She turned to look back at Thales, and from what little he could see of her face, he could tell that her expression was not a pleasant one. After all, I can't imagine you joining forces with the man who killed your father. His mouth went dry. The man, who killed my father. Him? An almost sadistic laugh bubbled from his throat. Edelgard, is what you speak of true? Absolutely. This is the man who orchestrated the tragedy of Duscur, and the man who killed your father. Her voice was resolute, and he could detect no treachery in her words. If what you say is true, if this man truly murdered my father, then we have much to discuss. Until that moment, nobody lays a single hand on you. Thales no longer had such a wide smile on his face. King Dimitri, what use is there in continuing this farce? You must share our mission. All we desire is a world free from those who would oppress us. Your father was one such person who would trample anyone beneath his feet if they disagreed with him, even going so far as to launch an attack on Srang preemptively. Surely, you must know all of this after all, there is no other reason to keep Epimenides so close to your side despite knowing their identity. Edelgard was the first to react to that. Epimenides? That name, Dimitri, how do you dash? You're referring to Shay, are you not? After all, that dark magic, there is no one else who has anything quite like it aside from you. However, Shay, she is a kind person who has aided us through many battles. Even now, she is fighting for our future. When I think of someone as brave and kind as her being compared to someone like you, it makes my blood boil. Make no mistake, I will absolutely kill you here. Thales' face had gone almost completely blank, and with a sigh, the man readied a sword. Dimitri knew his own visage must have been something terrifying. His teeth were grinding down impossibly hard against each other, and he could feel sweat beating down his brow from the force of his anger. Still, somehow, despite the inferno of rage that dwelled within him, he could only raise Eridbar and pray that it remained intact. Edelgard, with me. We'll take him together. She was far ahead of him, leading the charge against Thales before he had even finished speaking. Since when were you qualified to give orders to the Emperor of Adrestia? Follow my lead, Dimitri. With a wild grin, he stayed right on her toes. Her axe swung wide, flitting about in a feat of speed and strength unheard of for any user of the weapon. A chorus of scarlet flames erupted around Thales as she attacked, the mage barely deflecting them. Dimitri was close behind her, Eridbar's azure lightning dancing in the air with abandon. Occasionally, when the two forces of lightning and fire clashed, they would fizzle out something he would notice had he been paying any more attention. The voices in his head clamored for this man's head, and he was all too happy to provide. He laughed as he swung, the sound delirious and deranged. It was only when El roughly grabbed the back of his armor and saved his life from a dangerous dark magic blast that he realized he was overextending. Slow down. I want to kill him as much as you do, but rampaging around like this will only waste energy. Look at him, he's not even winded. Although Dimitri was hyper-focused on one sole thing right now, he wasn't incapable of diverting his attention. He could see her reasoning. The mage, despite weathering the attacks of two of Fodlan's strongest for well over a minute, was barely even phased. Was he even excellent in close quarters combat? You two are but beasts, trying to bite the hand that feeds you. Allow me to show you the folly of your ways. Thales sheathed his sword and his body began to float. As he did so, countless dark magic glyphs erupted into space around him, and for the first time that battle, true fear wormed its way into his heart. Each of those glyphs had far more power than a normal mage could produce. Keep calm, Dimitri. Just follow my lead, and we'll survive. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dimitri swallowed, and he hefted Eridbar. Understood. I'm with you. And that was when the onslaught began. Elle held a holy weapon in her hands, something that compared to the hero's relics, something that could rejuvenate its wielder and keep their body healthy if forged correctly. Within his hands was Eredbar, the lance that held the blood of thousands and allowed no defense against its attacks when in the proper hands. Both of them were capable of deflecting magical attacks. However, had he attempted to simply guard against this attack, he never would have survived. Only by following Elle's lead did he even stand a chance. She moved fluently, her eyes darting between every single glyph and watching as the magic wormed its way through space. Her axe moved with precision, no movement wasted as she tore her way through the magic, the dark orbs flying around Arianrhod like flies around manure. He, of course, kept pace with her every step of the way, his lance flitting between offense and defense whenever it was necessary. In all of his life, he had never required so much focus just to keep himself alive for another second. It truly was just like a ballroom dance in front of the eyes of the nobility, a single misstep meant death. It was much the same here. The overwhelming assault felt like it would never end. After what felt like an eternity, the orbs stopped flying, and Dimitri panted as Thales returned to the ground. That is but a demonstration of my powers. Lady Edelgard, you couldn't have been foolish enough to rebel against me knowing the difference in our strength, could you have? Who whispered in your ear and convinced you? Was it your friend here? Or was it another? Your vassal seems rather intent on protecting you. Dimitri turned to Elle, prepared to see her standing there and snarling back at Thales with an elegant response, but the only sight that met him was her hunched form, barely kept standing by her axe. His blood ran cold at the sight. Edelgard. She let out a soft chuckle, her lilac eyes opening despite the obvious strain of moving. The only ones who whispered in my ear, telling me to rebel, were my dead brothers and sisters, and all of the people you heard along the way. Thales' frown got deeper, and with a spark of dark magic, he was somehow instantly in front of Elle. That ability, it's like what Shay can do. Don't you dare touch her. Dimitri leapt forwards, raising his arm back to hurl Eredbar, but before he even could, Thales was directly in front of him. Such a predictable beast, Thales sighed, and Dimitri's world became pain. Dark magic smoldered from his chest as he was cast to the ground. He rolled several times, his vision blurry as he stared at Elle. Weakly, she tried to stand, but before she could get anywhere, she collapsed. Standing before her, Thales snapped his fingers, and a pulsing red object suddenly manifested into the air above Elle. She let out an ear-piercing scream, and he weakly raised his arm, trying desperately to scramble his way over to her, to help, to do something. His head roared with a cacophony of voices, all of them screaming for him to move, to kill Thales, to help Edelgard, to do something. His mind roared in pain as he even attempted to lift his chest. Goddess, if you can hear me, please, save Elle. I will offer my soul to the eternal flames if I must, if only you will save that woman. And then, as though his prayers had been answered, a beam of light erupted from somewhere behind Dimitri, and Thales was sent flying. The red, pulsing thing entered Edelgard, seeming to almost melt beneath her skin, and he felt like screaming. Before he could even begin to worry about Edelgard, however, he had to worry about the man before him. Thales, after a short moment, stood back up, despite the direct hit from some of the most pure faith magic he had ever seen. You, the Felstar. A pair of boots stepped in front of Dimitri's blurry vision, and he tried to reach out to help, but the exhaustion of the battle had caught up to him and he had drunk his last concoction after dueling Edelgard. It seemed, for now, he would be capable of doing nothing but watching. It's bad business if I let a client die while I'm on the job. Dimitri's blood ran cold. That voice. It was the Ashen Demon Byleth Eisner. Then, that means fear, pure and simple, was what pushed enough adrenaline to his body to stand. He would be doing little else aside from that. Shay. What? A cough rattled his body, and the Ashen Demon turned his attention towards Dimitri. That's enough. The mercenary will survive. They made it difficult to get here, that's all. The man raised a hand, and warm, bright, and pure healing magic washed over him. He had never felt something like this before, even Mercedes had never produced something like this. Not only that, but, the Ashen Demon wasn't even known to be proficient in faith, and yet, he had produced 2 mind-boggling spells, one after the other. On top of that, didn't the reports state that the Ashen Demon had dark blue hair? Why, then, did he have light green hair now? Eventually, he decided to stop pondering questions he couldn't answer. Although the man had healed Dimitri, it was an entirely different story for if it would be worth it. Dimitri hadn't been able to land a scratch on Thales, not even when he was giving it his all. Now, he was still exhausted, and although the magic healed his body, it would never be a true replacement for the lost energy. However, despite that, even Thales seemed unsure. He stared at the Ashen Demon with a mix of fear and revulsion. "Very well, Lady Edelgard. You shall yet live another day, or perhaps you won't." With as little preamble as when he arrived, Thales vanished, and the clearing fell silent. With a sudden lapse in action, Dimitri's legs quivered. It was getting difficult to stand. The dark magic had hurt him far more than he expected, in far more ways than he was prepared to handle. The exhaustion of taking, and subsequently holding, Aryan Rod against an objectively superior force did not make things much easier. Byleth turned to him, and Dimitri was suddenly reminded of who, exactly, was paying the demon at the moment. "Ah, you probably wish to dash. We need to leave. Now. Signal all forces to retreat." Dimitri blinked. "What?" "In a few minutes, something called a Javelin of Light will strike Aryan Rod. It will be turned to dust instantly. Anyone inside it will not fare much better." How do you know this? How do you expect me to believe you? Is this some sort of elaborate trap? If I wanted all of you dead, I would just not tell you to retreat. If it were anyone else, any other man, Dimitri would have come to the conclusion that it was a trap, or that he was lying. However, with such a sincere yet deadpan look on the man's face, he could only come to the conclusion that he was telling the truth. "Very well, then. I can't fathom what type of device could cause that, and yet, I believe you. All kingdom forces, sound the alarm for retreat. We are to abandon Aryan Rod. Evacuate immediately." Byleth echoed his commands, this time calling for both Geralt's mercenaries and the Empire soldiers to flee. However, before they went anywhere, there was a major problem on their hands. Edelgard was still collapsed, her breathing faint. The Ashen Demon had cast magic on her, but only to minimal success. They had only a scant few minutes, and any discussion would need to happen rapidly. Grimacing, he prepared himself for an awkward conversation. Arkemp is the closest fortified position. If we want to heal her with any degree of certainty, we should bring her there. Of course, I understand if dash. No, I agree. That's the best course of action. I will carry her. Dimitri blinked, failing to comprehend what he was watching as Byleth slung Edelgard over his shoulder like she was a sack of potatoes. Perhaps I should carry her. No. I see. Despite this setback, they were still the first out of the Silver Maiden. Felix was the second, and he was, understandably, very, very displeased. What the hell are you thinking, Bor? Do you know how many lives we sacrificed to take that place, and now we're abandoning it? If you want to commit tactical suicide, don't bring the rest of us into it. Someone has to write home to the families of the knights who died out there. And what the hell are you doing, fraternizing with the demon? He cut apart our defenses like they were butter. Dimitri just fixed Felix with a long-suffering look. While he knew that he was well deserving of the verbal lashings he frequently received from the man, by now, he was mentally and physically spent. "Felix, there is something far larger going on here than what it may seem, and until I get my answers, this is what must be done." Felix just scoffed. "You and your answers. You're chasing a pipe dream, Bor. I want to find out what happened that day just as much as you do, but that doesn't mean that I'm waging the whole damn war on it. Felix, I fought against the man who caused the tragedy. Edelgard was by my side the whole way, and if she is to be believed, she knows far more than what she's shared. That is why, until I uncover the whole truth of the matter, I must continue on as I am." Felix's eyes were wide, and even the unflappable shield of Faerghus seemed shaken. "You fought against him? What do you mean? He was here? Then why did you dash?" "Hey, Felix. A jubilant voice called out from behind, and a mop of red hair introduced itself to Dimitri's vision, as well as Felix's neck, apparently. Felix's expression had gone from shocked to surly in a matter of seconds. "Now isn't the time for your antics, Sylvain." Felix's voice had a hard edge to it that only Sylvain seemed capable of creating. It's never the time for his antics, and yet he always manages to pull it off, somehow. Ingrid waltzed onto the other side of Felix, an easygoing grin on her face. "You seem quite chipper," Felix grunted. "Well, I do not like to retreat like this, but I trust you, Dimitri. You have not led us astray yet. If you called for it, that means that it was necessary even though we held most of the fortress." Something cold in his heart warmed, and he managed a small smile. "Thank you, Ingrid. Your faith means a lot to me." Felix just snorted. "Can it, Bor? We're all putting our faith in you because you're our king. Don't let it go to your head." Dimitri curled his hand around his chin. At Felix's light blush and his immediate rebuttal, Dimitri could only laugh. The rest of the Blue Lions, recruited or otherwise, quickly filtered out of the fortress, some of them followed closely by or directly alongside members of Geralt's mercenaries. The namesake himself didn't appear until last, galloping out on a horse wearing a heavy frown. Surprisingly, it was Dimitri whom he approached first. "Hey, you. Do you know where Byleth went? That kid's worrying me. He never takes direct command like that without asking me." Didu, having rejoined the group, was the first to respond. "While you are a respected member of a band of mercenaries, I ask that you treat the king with respect." Dimitri just let out a short laugh. No, Didu, it's quite all right. I couldn't imagine asking Geralt the Blade Breaker to bow to me. As for the demon, I haven't seen him in the last few moments or so. I imagine everything will be made clear soon." Geralt's frown deepened, and he stared back out over Arianrhod. Without another word, he kicked his horse and worked his way back over towards his band of mercenaries. Dimitri turned his attention back to Edelgard, who was starting to receive treatment, resting against a stretcher on the ground. Both Mercedes and some imperial bishops fretted over the woman, both parties clearly uneasy but working together nonetheless. Doing his best to maintain his smile, he turned his attention over to the fortress. Despite his words, he was still concerned. "Where have you gone, Byleth? And at such a pivotal moment? You know, you could just leave her there. You're well within your rights to do so. She's tried to kill you multiple times. She's even a bit obsessed with you, I would say. You should learn to cut toxic women out of your life. I say, are you ignoring me? Why, the nerve, I ought to give you 100 laps around the throne. What do you think about that, huh? Please stop ignoring me. I'm getting worried. I'm sorry. I'm still not entirely convinced you're real." "Why, the nerve?" Ignoring the demented ramblings of a gremlin living in his head without paying rent, he hurried through Arianrhod. This place was going to blow, he was certain of it. Incredibly certain of it, actually. He knew because he had lived it once before. Technically twice, but the second one didn't count because he hadn't died that time. In fact, the only reason he was even searching for that mercenary was because Dimitri had become very, very angry when he learned that she had still been inside the fortress when it exploded. It wasn't difficult for him to make his way there. He remembered exactly where he left her, and just as he thought, she hadn't moved. As he approached, her deep purple eyes opened, and she looked up at him with a hazy gaze. You come back to finish the job." Their fight had been somewhat intense the first time. It was nothing insurmountable, in fact, it could even have been classified as easy. He was stronger than her before she awakened, but she was stronger than him when she was in that state. When she threatened his life too harshly, he reached out to a presence in his mind, something that had always been there, and the presence reached back. That was how he found Suthies, and discovered the Divine Pulse. It was an ability that allowed him to freeze time for a short amount of time for whatever he pleased, and it was an ability that let him turn back the hands of time. It was the only reason he, the entire Kingdom Army, the entirety of Geralt's mercenaries, and the entirety of the remaining Imperial detachment weren't a fine mist scattered to the wind by now. It was also what allowed him to cleanly stab her through the gut. He looked up at the sky. There's 2 minutes left. I can get out in time. She didn't even ask what he meant. Her head just lolled forwards and her eyes closed once more. If he were the dramatic sort, he would believe that she had died, right then and there. Fortunately, he was connected spiritually to a mind gremlin that was still screaming at him, so he wasn't feeling very dramatic at the moment. Recover. The magic drained him somewhat. It wasn't enough to put him out of commission, not by far, but it was very powerful magic usually limited to only some of the stronger mages. The wound around her stomach closed, but not fully. Byleth frowned. That's a pain. It would be slower to walk if he held her in a different carry than what he was used to. He also got the strange feeling that she would needle him about this unnecessarily when she awoke. Still, he wrapped an arm under her legs and supported her back and neck, and he began to run as fast as he could out of Arianrhod. 400 laps, huh? You ever think about that? I think that sounds rather easy. 600 laps, huh? Dimitri watched, panic in his heart as Byleth walked out of Arianrhod with Shay in his arms. She almost looked dead with how pale she was. She had clearly been bleeding for quite some time now, and she was definitely out of the battle for some time from now on. He watched as Byleth gently set her down inside the healer tent, drumming his fingers against his arm. The waiting was agitating him. The Ashen Demon had claimed it would only be a few minutes, yet close to 10 minutes had passed without incident. Had it been a trap after all? Was it? Dimitri watched as a light fell from the sky, and the Silver Maiden erupted. To call that weapon the Goddess Fury would not be too inaccurate. It was difficult to imagine a being with enough power to raise Arianrhod to the ground without 100,000 men, let alone a single attack. In just a few seconds, everything they had fought for was rubble. A splitting headache formed rapidly at the thought of the war from this point on. The three forces were all silent for a long moment, staring at the destruction, nobody daring to break the fragile silence. That is, until one of Geralt's mercenaries suddenly spoke up, his tone gruff as his voice echoed, "Can I just say that I'm speaking for everyone when I ask what the he-double-fuck was that?" Dimitri just shook his head. Crude language aside, I also have my fair share of questions. I assume you can answer them, Byleth. The man seemed almost serene under the scrutiny he was suddenly given, his eyes staring out into space as though he were silently speaking with someone aside from them. That would be for the best. Chapter 2, Azure Gleam Devotion. The year is 1182. 5 moons have passed since the battle at Arianrhod. Emperor Edelgard has been declared dead by the kingdom following the destruction of Arianrhod, and subsequently, her right to rule has been scrubbed from the books in Adrestia. While the war itself has changed little in this time, Adrestia has undergone a striking transformation. Its streets run red with the blood of its citizens, who are beset by rampant pillage and slaughter. Dimitri resolves to kill the acting emperor, dismantle Adrestia, and put an end to this grim reality. Dimitri's hand curled around his chin. Is what you say true? Byleth's stoic face was unflinching. Most likely. Regent Volkhard von Arundel is the only one who meets the description you provided. He was close enough to Edelgard when she was young to be able to interact with the royal family. Given his position and proximity, coupled with the sudden halt of his donations to the Central Church, he is the most likely candidate. Thales, have you really taken the role of Edelgard's uncle? He whispered, horror curling around his gut. Given the incidents you mentioned with that librarian, Tamash, and that court mage, Cornelia, it's far from impossible. Magic that allows you to take the form of another seems to be right up their alley. Byleth's reasoning was sound. But why? What is their goal? They claim to be attempting to remove those who would oppress us, but who, or what, does that refer to? Byleth shook his head. It's impossible to tell without speaking to him again. For now, he is simply our enemy. I see. You're right. I shouldn't dash. Your Majesty. Dimitri perked up, glancing towards a messenger that had made his way into the council room. Yes? What is the matter? It's, Her Majesty, Lady Edelgard is starting to awaken. His eyes went wide, and at his side, Byleth perked up. She's waking. He didn't wait for a response before he immediately rushed from the room, Byleth close behind him. The messenger was pushed to the side in his haste. Everything hurt. This pain wasn't unfamiliar. It was something she had experienced time and time again. She had endured it for years and watched as others endured it for longer. Her body felt frail, even more so than normal. Even moving seemed like a monumental test, but she could not allow herself to rest, not when Thales was still at large. A sweet song caressed her ears, the voice familiar. The high tones sounded practiced, but it was something akin to a lullaby, meant to calm children. It was no sound she had ever heard before. Slowly, with great effort, she forced her eyes open, wincing at the overwhelmingly bright sunlight. She was in a bed, with someone gently clasping her hand. Looking to her left, she saw an achingly familiar face. Dorothea. Her voice was cracked with disuse, the word tripping and stumbling as it worked its way out of her mouth. How long had she been asleep? Dorothea gave her a warm but weary smile. Edie, you're finally awake. How long? The doors slammed open, and Dorothea jumped, her hand clasping Edelgard's more tightly. The woman cast a hostile look in the direction of the noise, but Edelgard was too weary to even react to it. All she could do was turn her head towards the disturbance. Standing in the entrance to the door, hovering almost shyly despite the fact that this was certainly kingdom territory, was Dimitri. A headache threatened to blossom, and she groaned somewhat. Edelgard, are you? Dimitri's voice was pained, and extremely worried. Dorothea cut in before he could even begin to continue talking. She needs rest, Your Majesty. It wouldn't be very graceful of you to bother a patient who just awoke from a coma. A coma? She had been in a coma? Dimitri's frustrated face was almost comical in its absurdity. She knew that he only cared for her information, so why was he looking at her with those puppy dog eyes? Surely their short time in the academy wasn't enough to develop any sort of meaningful relationship. She had orchestrated it as such on purpose. How long was I out? Her hoarse voice overrode any objections that the king might have had. 5 moons, Edie. We've all been worried. 5 moons. What about the war? What about her empire? She couldn't be absent for such a long time, especially not with Thales on the loose. Desperately, she cast her eyes over to Dimitri, who seemed to pick up on her nonverbal cue instantly. Much has happened in your absence. We must speak as soon as possible. I understand your need for rest, but Your Majesty, I don't think you do understand. Nobody knows what happened to her. It was only thanks to the Ashen Demon that she even recovered at all. I insist, Edie needs to rest. So, the Ashen Demon was here. Strange, however, that he was the only reason for her recovery. Surely there were more talented healers out there? She had always longed to have that one girl, Mercedes, back in the Empire. Linhard was an excellent mage and an even better scholar, but it was hard to match that woman's warmth and talent with faith. Unless, was the Ashen Demon working with them? Those who slither in the dark, the Agarthants. There was also the chance, unlikely though it seemed, that Dimitri was working with Thales. While his righteous anger had certainly seemed real, it wouldn't be the first time someone had pretended to be their enemy, only to stab her in the back later. This type of treatment seemed out of character for Dimitri as well, who could only benefit from her death. In that case, there must be a hidden motive, some hidden agenda that Dimitri held, and she intended to find it. Either way, they had worked well together, and if he truly sought to make her an ally, well, she would prefer to avoid as much bloodshed as possible. Her enemies were Rhea and Thales, nobody else. Unfortunately, regardless of whose side Dimitri was on, those two enemies put him directly in her path. She let out a slight sigh and spoke, overriding both of their bickering. I'll talk. But I want water. Dimitri seemed surprised, but he nodded after a short moment. Understood. I'll send one of the maids. I want Dorothea to get it. Dorothea didn't speak for a moment, pursing her lips. Edie, are you sure that's a good idea? Please, just go. All Edelgard could do was squeeze Dorothea's hand in response. With a slight sigh and a warning glare to Dimitri, Dorothea stood and exited the room with her infinite grace. As the door shut softly behind her, Dmitri turned his attention back to Edelgard, sitting down in the chair next to the bed. I imagine you have many questions. I'll answer them as truthfully as I can. Good. The longer it takes for me to answer your questions, the more reason you have to keep me alive. Until I'm well enough to mount an escape, I'll have to lead him around in circles. What became of Thales? How did you chase him off? Dmitri rubbed the back of his head, his eyes turning from worried to sheepish. Well, it wasn't I who did that. You can thank the Ashen Demon for that one. She blinked. Byleth had done that? She had no idea that the mercenary was strong enough to force back Thales, of all people. He was well worth the coin. How is the Empire? It is in dire straits. In the past 5 moons, Duke Agir has taken position as the acting emperor, since there are no heirs to the throne and Lord Arundel refused it. His leadership has sent Adrestia almost straight into the ground. Citizens are dying and banditry is rampant. Your military has also lost much discipline. I suspect he is being manipulated by Thales in the background. She let out an aggrieved sigh. I'll have to remedy that. What of the war? In a stalemate. Very little of import has happened in the last 5 moons. With Arianrod leveled, however, it has become difficult to maintain dash. What? Dmitri blinked slowly. Ah, yes. Arianrod was demolished by something called a Javelin of Light, presumably used by Thales. He launched it in retaliation to the Ashen Demon's attack on him. That didn't make sense. Thales would never have launched a javelin for a reason as trivial as that. The Silver Maiden was a key component of the war, true, but it was far from reasonable to reveal the existence of the javelins over the loss of the fortress. No, something far larger was going on, and her questions could no longer be ignored. Her eyes narrowed, she almost glared at Dmitri. Where is the Ashen Demon now? He tilted his head, reminding her of a confused puppy. Ah, that's he was right behind me. I was certain that he had something to talk to you about. The door creaked open, and from behind it walked in Byleth. Both lords stared at him, neither impressed. The timing was so coincidental it couldn't have been caused by anything other than eavesdropping. My apologies. I've been told it's rude to interrupt. Dmitri just let out a weary sigh, and she felt somewhat vindicated upon hearing it. The Ashen Demon was an incredibly talented mercenary, but dealing with him directly was an incredible chore at times. However, putting all of that aside. Your hair. It had gone from its usual navy blue to a mint green. The same applied to his eyes. The color was sickeningly close to that of Ria's, and a sprout of worry filled her. Byleth nodded. Yes, you are not the first to notice. I don't understand the change myself. That is not why I came here, however. Edelgard tilted her head, and the Ashen Demon continued. You never paid us. What? You gave us half of the payment for the job up front, and promised us the other half if we successfully kept Arianrod out of the kingdom's hands. Since Arianrod is not in the kingdom's hands, I would say we succeeded. There was a dead silence in the room as the baffling statement settled over them. Arianrod is rebel, Byleth. Dmitri was the first to complain. It would not have been so had I decided to wipe my hands clean of the job, and it would have resoundingly been under the kingdom's control. I kept you out of Thales' hands and ensured the kingdom lost an important foothold. The Empire came out of that attack in far better straits than the kingdom. Edelgard grit her teeth. Annoyingly, he had a point. If he hadn't been there, she couldn't even imagine the damage that might have been caused. Letting out an aggrieved sigh, she nodded. Very well, then. We'll discuss payment further when I recover and regain access to my coffers. We are in Thirdiad, are we not? Until I return to the Empire, you'll have to wait. The demon was quiet for a moment, staring down at her with a passive expression. She hated the look on his face. It felt invasive, in some ways. Very well. I will speak to Geralt about remaining here. The demon left as quickly as he had arrived, and once more, she and Dmitri were alone again. There must have been a strange expression on her face, because Dmitri attempted to reassure her. The demon does not fight for us. I was wondering why he remained here, but it seems that he was simply searching for payment. He avoided our questions for 5 whole moons, only to answer them all in one fell swoop when you awakened. He's an excellent man and a better warrior, but he can be quite vexing at times. Edelgard said nothing, just huffing once more. Her body seemed to be dragging her back down into unconsciousness. She knew that she couldn't stay awake for long, but there was still so much to do. Dimitri, why did you keep me alive? Her true thoughts escaped her in a moment of grogginess, and she regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. A complicated expression crossed the man's face, and he folded his hands over his lap. I suppose there are many reasons. There is, of course, the information you have. You know about the origins of the tragedy, and likely far more. I would like it if you shared your thoughts on that. There are other, more personal reasons as well. Edelgard felt like bursting into laughter when she saw how his ears were tipped with red. He was acting like a schoolboy with a crush. Perhaps he hadn't grown as much as she had since their time at Gareg Mach. If her circumstances weren't as precarious as they were, perhaps she truly would have started to laugh. Instead, she settled on a diplomatic, I see. Thank you for the explanation. He sobered up quickly, clearing his throat and looking out the window. Edelgard, I'm certain that you need to rest, just as Dorothea stated. However, before I leave you, I do have one pressing question. Do you know what became of your mother, Anselma? Edelgard blinked, confounded at the question. No. I haven't seen my mother since I was a child. You likely know as well as I do what happened to her. She didn't press for details. Why he wished to know that was well beyond her, and she completely lacked the energy to ask. However, denying her captor information was akin to suicide in these circumstances. Dimitri had claimed to have personal reasons for keeping her alive, but if she pressed too many buttons and withheld too much information, her value as a prisoner would plummet, and she could be easily killed or tortured. Not only that, but there was no immediate downside to pooling their knowledge. While Dimitri and her would likely never meet eye to eye when it came to the purpose of her war, he was still a capable leader with a vast and hardy military might. He would be a valuable asset when it came to defeating Thales, although, if the Ashen Demon remained docile and loyal, he would serve as an even better tool. She had to win this war no matter what. It was the quickest path to freedom that led to the fewest deaths. No matter what, Rhea and Thales had to be killed. They could not be allowed to maintain their sway over the world. Uneasily, she allowed herself to fall to sleep, unaware of Dimitri's deep frown that had settled on his face. Is this true, Lady Rhea? The Archbishop nodded, Seath looking perturbed by her side. It is. Edelgard told me as much before she left to deal with the upheaval in Inver. While she is long gone now, her information remains invaluable to us even now. Dimitri nodded, doing his absolute best to keep a straight face. While he disliked keeping such a secret, it was vital to maintain order in the kingdom, and in the empire, if they believed that Edelgard was dead. As such, although he trusted the Archbishop, he had seen her face whenever Edelgard was mentioned flat, with such a monotone smile that it could easily be called murderous. The two women truly hated each other. This was simply for the best to ensure Edelgard's continued survival. Rhea continued, oblivious to his internal strife. Regent Volkhard von Arundel was colluding with Tamash and his fellow knaves. So, that confirms it. The Ashen Demon's information gathering was correct. It seemed that the man could be trusted to complete jobs in exchange for continued housing in Faerghus. I see. Is it reasonable, then, to assume that Thales has taken the role of Arundel? Seath cleared his throat, looking troubled. While it is certainly possible, considering the position of power it would grant him and the proximity to the Emperor the position holds, it is equally likely that it is another one of their group. You mentioned that your court mage, Cornelia, was also replaced, yes? Until we get confirmation, there is no way to tell if it was their leader or simply a henchman. There is, unfortunately, no way to know following Edelgard's death. Dimitri nodded solemnly. During our final confrontation, Edelgard claimed that Thales was the man who orchestrated the tragedy of Duscur and subsequently, the man who killed my father. I find it difficult to take a bitter enemy's assertions as fact, but the pieces all fit. Rhea nodded, a pleased smile crossing her face. Indeed. It is difficult to accept the words of traitors, and while I do not mean to speak ill of the dead, she was one of the worst traitors of all. But, I digress. Before we continue with our counsel, was there anything else you needed from us, Dmitri? You have graciously taken our church into your borders, and your people are suffering for it. While what we can provide is limited, I would like to pay back your kindness in some manner. Lightning struck in Dmitri's mind, and a plan hatched almost instantly. Ah, yes, there is actually something I would like to request from you. It may seem somewhat trivial, but I've encountered a problem that I must ask your assistance with. There was a keen look in the Archbishop's eyes, and she folded her hands in front of her. You need only ask, King Dmitri. Seath shot him a warning look. There is a band of mercenaries that have taken up temporary asylum within Fhirdiad. They aided the Empire during Aryan Rod, but after the fortress destruction, they agreed to temporarily cease hostilities. However, in the interim, we have been met with some mutual difficulties. You see, as they have worked with the Empire in the past, I believe that they have been poisoned by the honeyed propaganda that is spewed from their mouths. Many of them believe in Coin more than the goddess, and some even curse her name for their misfortunes. Not only that, but they are resistant to the teachings of our priests. It would be a great help if you could speak with them and show them the error of their ways. I worry things may get rowdy otherwise. The Archbishop frowned, and even Seath looked somewhat confused. A band of mercenaries, you say? They must be exceptional if they aided the Empire during such an important siege. Seath's voice was cautious. Dmitri smiled. The hook has been cast. Next is to lay the bait. Ah, yes, I'm certain you have heard of them. They are Geralt's mercenaries, one of the strongest companies around. While they don't work with us directly, it is still a boon to have them within our sight, and I would like them to remain as long as possible. He watched as Ria's eyes went from almost complete disinterest to curiosity with one simple name. Geralt, that is quite fortuitous. King Dmitri, were you aware that Geralt was once a captain in the Knights of Syros? Ria's voice was deceptively sweet. The bait has been laid. He allowed his eyes to go wide. I had heard him being called captain many times in the past, but I had no idea that he was once in the Knights of Syros. That explains his skill. Seath curled his hand around his chin. Yes, Geralt acquired the title of Blade Breaker while under the employ of the Knights. However, he vanished after a great fire in Gareg Mach Monastery, many moons ago. This was well before even my time at the monastery. Yes, I do wonder how he is doing. Perhaps I will pay him a visit after this meeting is concluded. Ria mused quietly. I imagine he will be thrilled to have you. Even after all this time, it has been a somewhat rough transition for all of us, and meeting someone familiar would likely soften the blow. At this time, they are likely training in the courtyard. If this meeting concludes in a timely manner, perhaps you may even catch the tail end of his spar with his son. Ria's eyes went wide. Pardon me. And there's the sinker. Oh, you haven't heard? One of Geralt's most prolific mercenaries is his own son, who's earned the moniker of the Ashen Demon. He's an incredibly powerful man, and one of many mysteries. Why, recently, his hair even changed color, going from a dark blue to a light green, not too far from that of someone like Flame. Indeed, he dash. Perhaps I should go. Ria suddenly spoke aloud, and with far more volume than was necessary. Dmitri paused in his speech. Her eyes were wide, and there was something frantic in them, something almost manic. At that moment, he wasn't certain if he had made a mistake or not. Yes, but shouldn't we dash? Seath will answer all of your questions. I will see Geralt. Now. You said he was in the courtyard, correct? Dmitri got the strangest feeling that he could have sent her halfway across the country if he had told her that Byleth was there. Yes, that is correct dash. Ria turned and almost ran out the door, barely avoiding stumbling over her own feet. His eyes were wide as he watched her go. Not once had he ever seen the Archbishop lose any shred of composure, but in that moment, her dignity had completely fled her. Even Seath looked baffled at her behavior, staring after her exit with an expression of pure disbelief. King Dmitri, is there something you haven't shared with us? Slowly, he shook his head. All Geralt did was ask us to keep Rhea away from him if she arrived, but their group was getting too rowdy to be ignored. I'm sure Hearsay would have sent her in his direction before the day was over, regardless. I wished to speak to you privately, as well. The advisor glanced around, confirming that they were alone save for Dedue, who remained ever faithfully standing guard. Has a development occurred with Edelgard? Dimitri nodded. While he didn't enjoy acting underhandedly, he had chosen to share information with Seath first. In fact, the man was the first and only outsider he had informed of Edelgard's condition so far. It was under Seath's advice that he had locked down all information on Edelgard, and it was Seath who had given him the idea to announce that she had perished. While the falsehood could come back to haunt him, he believed that this move would protect her best for the time being. Edelgard awoke earlier today. It appears that she is still severely weakened, but she is all right for now. I managed to confirm that she played no part in my stepmother's death, which leads me to believe that Cornelia may have been lying. Cornelia, that witch, had proclaimed that Edelgard had arranged the death of Anselma, his stepmother, also known as Patricia. From her reaction, it seemed that Edelgard wasn't aware of their relation, alongside the rest of the world. A simple name change and hair dye were enough to fool any onlookers, including her own daughter. Seath sighed. I see. Thank you for trusting me with this information. As usual, please try and keep this from Rhea. I do not wish for you to suffer because of your empathy, even if I do not agree with it. I understand how far some would go for family. The man's smile was real and genuine, if small. He couldn't imagine being in Seath's position after all. Edelgard had raised the banner of war against him, his family, and his religion. He would not fault Seath for hating the woman with every fiber of his being, and yet he managed to remain ambivalent even in the face of the news that she had awoken. And then, a new voice clambered its way into the chamber. Hey, hope I'm not interrupting. It's been a while, Dimitri, Seath. He exhaled shortly. There were more things he wished to discuss with the advisor, but they would have to wait. Claude, it is good to see you. My apologies for forcing you to come all the way to Fhirdiad for this. I understand it is far out of the way. You're telling me. If you wanted to have a secret tryst, I'm sure there are better places to do it than this frigid capital of yours. I'm excited to get some of that famous kingdom hospitality while I'm here, though. Claude's words were chipper, despite the chill that had clearly set into his bones. Seath sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Claude, it is good to see you. I am glad to see that this war has not dampened your adventurous personality. Ha! That'll be the day. Say, you haven't aged a day in the last 2 years, Seath. You have to tell me your secret. Claude fired back a response instantly, and Seath frowned. Perhaps another time. We have more important matters at hand that must be addressed. You would not have called this meeting if not for them, would you not? Claude's wide grin faded somewhat. Yeah, you're right on that one. Before we get started, though, what's the deal with Rhea? I passed by her on my way in, but she just stormed past without saying a word. Is she going to be at this meeting, or what? What on earth is Byleth's significance? Although I am her advisor, I can safely say that I have no idea what is going through her mind at the moment. She has excused herself from this meeting. It would be best if we proceeded without her, as I doubt she will be returning for quite some time. All right, I get ya. Can't say her presence won't be missed, though. She didn't become the leader of the Church of Ceros for nothing, Claude lamented, although there was no real remorse behind his words. Dimitri spoke, this time quietly. Claude, before we begin, there is something that I wish to discuss with you. I believe it will dramatically change the course of this meeting. Claude turned to him with a slight smile on his face. Well, I love to hear when my plans get torn apart by the seams. What's the big deal? King Dimitri, do you mean to tell him about the most recent development? I do. Is that wise, do you reckon? I am unsure. However, I will leave it at your discretion. If you believe it is more of a boon than a burden, then perhaps he can be enlightened as well. All right, now you've got me interested. I'm not letting up until I hear this. Claude's smile had turned from charming to curious. Dimitri mentally prepared himself. Edelgard still lives. She is within the walls of Thirdiad, although she is in no shape to be leading Adrestia. Claude's eyes went wide, and he whistled. That's quite the state secret you're sharing with me there, Your Highness. Still, though, it makes sense. I thought it was just propaganda when you announced that she was dead, but when the Empire supported the story and denounced her right to the throne, I wasn't sure what to believe. So, what's the real story there? I need to know before I start making any moves. Dimitri hesitated, but he still spoke up. During the Battle of Arianrod, Edelgard revealed that the one who killed my father was a man named Thales. He appeared during my clash with Edelgard, and we temporarily collaborated to attempt to kill him. He was frighteningly powerful, and he used a strange magic that put her into a coma. I do not wish to imagine what would have happened if he were able to complete the spell. She only awoke today, however, and she is far weaker now than she was during that battle. Claude curled his hand around his chin. I see. So, a failed spell still put her in a coma, huh? Well, now that she's awake, what's the plan? Dimitri blinked. The plan? Yeah, you know, Claude gestured aimlessly in the air, the plan. Well, I don't have any plans in particular. I just dash. Oh, Dimitri, you poor fool. You can't just kidnap the Emperor of Adrestia and not have a plan. I bet you don't even realize just how important you became, huh? Seath cleared his throat. I have tried to stress the importance of his position upon him, but King Dimitri remains adamant that Edelgard is to be unharmed. I understand that she is a person of great power, but she does not deserve to be treated like a prisoner within the walls of Thirdiad. Yes, we are enemies, but that does not mean that we must be antagonistic towards each other. Claude gained a mischievous look to his eye. Well, who said that you have to be enemies? There's a lot more you can do in a situation like this. Just think of the story you could weave. The King of Faerghus rescues the Emperor of Adrestia and works tirelessly to save her life, all the while protecting her from assassins and even announcing her death just to protect her. Then, after that dash. Where are you going with this, Claude? Dimitri asked wearily. Claude gave him a sharp look. I'm saying that you have the power in this scenario. If you truly wanted to end this war in one fell swoop, all you would have to do is pressure Edelgard into a political marriage, and Faerghus would be safe. The idea splintered its way into his psyche immediately. What? Arrange, Claude, you must be jesting. I could not possibly force something like that onto Edelgard. Why not? It would hardly be the first time something like this has happened. I'm sure you could even learn to tolerate each other, after a while. It's the safest and most efficient route to protecting your people. It could even unify all of Fodlan in a generation or two if the right people have the right kids. Or do you want this war to continue? Do you want your people to suffer because of your selfishness? Claude's words had a harsh line to them, and he was giving Dimitri one of the most serious looks he ever had. Dimitri swallowed down his anger. I understand where your words are coming from. However, I refuse to resolve this situation in such a manner. There must be a better way. I refuse to take away Edelgard's freedom to choose who she loves. Besides, I've never been partial towards the system of marriage for political purposes. If we are to reach harmony, it should never be accomplished by forcing two hands to meet when they do not wish to. It should come about through a mutual understanding from all parties by reaching a decision where all people can avoid suffering, if possible. As much as I detest this war, Edelgard would never have started it without reason, and if I take that reason from her, she will forever detest me and that anger will eventually turn to vengeance. Claude was quiet for a long moment, staring at Dimitri with an inscrutable expression. You know, Dimitri, you're a lot more mature than I expected. For what it's worth, I agree with you. I don't think this war can be resolved with just a marriage or two. In fact, if you got married to Edelgard, I think things would just get worse for both of you in the long run. But we still have the same problem we did at the start. Once Edelgard is well enough to fight, she will try to run. At that time, what do you plan to do? Will you let her return to Inbar and continue her war, or will you force her to stay with the Kingdom Army, just like what you did with Dorothea, and Petra, and everyone else? Seath let out a long-suffering sigh. Claude, if you did not wish for him to marry, then why even broach the subject in the first place? His laments were ignored. What I will do at that time, I don't think I can answer that in good faith. Whether she is a prisoner of war or a patient in my care is something that even I have yet to determine. There is much I wish to know from her, and yet there is even more that she cannot help me with. The best answer I can give now. He paused, inhaling deeply and staring at the ceiling. I do not wish to steal her freedom from her, but if her actions would endanger my country or even all of Fodlan, I cannot sit idly by. Claude nodded thoughtfully. I see. As far as abductions go, you're one of the nicer kidnappers I've seen. She is a prisoner of war, Claude. It is vastly different. He groaned, a headache threatening to form. Yeah. Any other mind-shattering revelations to drop on me before we really get started? Seath spoke up once more. We have reason to believe that Thales, the man we mentioned before, is the puppet master behind Adrestia, and the one manipulating Duke Aegir. Great. That's just wonderful. If nothing else, we can kill two birds with one stone, if that stone is shaped into the form of your lance. Despite the optimistic look, Claude's smile had fallen noticeably. It could be far worse. Edelgard could still be in power. I would not like to imagine the state Faerghus would be in without Arianrhod to help defend our country if her forces were still disciplined. Yeah, that is one way it could be worse. The Empire's sure been really busy lately. Uprisings, sieges, revolutions, bandits, you name it, and it's probably going down over there. It's chaotic enough to make your head spin. Emperor Agirug, I hate saying that, isn't exactly helping things, either. He appointed his son as prime minister, and that son immediately fled the capital. I've half a mind to believe that this chaos is just a way to convince him to come back. Ferdinand never was one for chaos, Dmitri agreed. Too true. Unfortunately for us, the other half of my mind is watching their troop movements, and it seems like they're gearing up for something big. Their troops are starting to pool near the Ermid River, and that can only mean that they mean to cross it and do the same thing in Alliance territory. It's got all the fun of causing an uprising without any of the downsides, I guess. Dmitri crossed his arms, thinking hard. That will cause you numerous problems, I have no doubt. Are your forces sufficient enough to hold the Great Bridge of Myrddin? Nope. If they get through, the Alliance is going to see some serious rough times, and this time, I don't think they'll buy it if the new Count Gloucester suddenly folds and hands it over to them. I see. I'm afraid that there's not much I can do to immediately aid you, Claude. I can have my forces attempt to create a supply chain or send a detachment of soldiers, but they'll never make it in time. It took you days just to reach Fhirdiad while on a wyvern. I know, and that's why I came up with a different idea, which brings me to the real reason I called for this meeting. What say we partner up, and use our real strength to bring the Empire down? Dimitri's eyes went wide, and even Seath seemed surprised. Such a thing has not been done since Leicester split from Faerghus. Claude nodded at Seath's assessment and turned back to Dimitri, a steadfast expression on his face. Most of the lords of the Alliance wouldn't be happy about this idea. When it comes to the Round Table, sometimes the only thing keeping us together is the fact that we all split from Faerghus so long ago. However, desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm sure you understand just as well what I mean, Dimitri. Yes, I do. Even with the Knights of Syros bolstering our ranks, it's all we can do to prevent ourselves from being overrun, and with the loss of Arianrhod, our odds are worsening by the day. If Edelgard returns, there's a very real possibility that Faerghus could be annihilated. Leicester wouldn't be far behind if that happened. Even if we teamed up with the Empire, we would only be a stone's throw away from annihilation, and I'm sure that Edelgard has some fancy ideas about unifying the continent. I don't want Leicester to be gobbled up by the Empire as much as you don't want to see Faerghus be obliterated, Dimitri. Dimitri gave a weary smile to Claude. This idea holds merit. If we attack from both east and west, we could very well have a good chance at taking the capital, and the sooner we do so, the better. If we can cripple the Empire's military might, then Edelgard's return wouldn't be an issue for either of us. Splintering their army is the only way to mount a notable offensive against their army, and Inver's strategic location to the south makes launching an assault against it difficult if we do not cut a bloody path on our way there. I imagine you want to end this war with as few lives lost as possible too, right? There's an issue, though. While I think it's possible if we do it that way, it isn't very pretty for either of us. The Okama Mountains will be a major hassle to the west, and Count Berglis can stonewall us out on the eastern front. Duke Goneril can match him in battle, but he's too busy defending Fodlan's throat from the Amirans at the moment to be of any help to us. Even if you do get through, it would be near impossible to take Inver with your weakened forces. But, knowing your proclivities, I imagine that you've likely come to the same conclusion as I have, Claude. Seath chimed in, looking interested and even somewhat proud. Claude turned to the green-haired man, a roguish grin on his face. Well, that all depends. Was your idea to take Garreg Mach and attack from there? Indeed. You're quite the tactician, Duke Regan. Tell me, then, what is the best way to attack the monastery? Seath crossed his arms, that same smile sticking to his face. Personally, I planned to draw out the Imperial Army to each of our respective fronts, then launch a pincer attack from both east and west. I wish I could be more specific, but there's a lot to consider with something like this. On that, I could not agree more, Duke Regan. Your plan would work in theory, but in practice, it falls short. If I could offer my opinion, I believe it would be best to attack through Ailel. Lady Rhea and I know that valley like the back of our hand, and there is a separate, more hidden entrance to Garreg Mach inaccessible to the enemy. Claude's eyes lit up the same way they always did when he was hatching a scheme, and Dimitri gave a somewhat tentative smile. Perhaps this was possible, after all. How about this, then we'll engage the enemy as little as possible, prioritizing hit-and-run attacks to pester their front lines and weaken their forces. We don't need to actually hold a powerful presence to the east and the west so long as we make them think that we do. We'll draw out their forces and divert their attention from Garreg Mach, and when the time is right, we'll deploy an army through Ailel. As we march on Ailel, the Knights of Syros will move ahead of our army and, as we draw attention from Garreg Mach's main forces, they will infiltrate the monastery and seize it with a surprise attack. If everything goes well, we can take the monastery with minimal fighting and launch an attack on Inver shortly after. It's an excellent plan, Claude, but what will you do if the Empire does not take the bait, or worse, takes the bait too well? If they launch an attack on us as we're taking the monastery, we will lose vast swaths of our territories. Many will suffer if we do not execute this well. Dimitri rebutted. Indeed, King Dimitri speaks the truth. While the benefits of this plan are tremendous, the downfalls are great as well. It also relies on the monastery being poorly fortified, and the Knights of Syros have to successfully launch an attack from the inside while both the Alliance and Kingdom fight an uphill battle in an attempt to even enter the monastery. Claude splayed his hands. Relax, Seath, I've accounted for that. I've got a surprise or two up my sleeves for if the Empire gets a bit too overzealous in their attacks. I can, at worst, slow them down for long enough for our armies to return to our territories. As for the problem at Garreg Mach, that's another issue that can be solved rather easily. I'm not asking the Knights of Syros to take Garreg Mach by themselves, that would be suicide. No, all they need to do is get the gates open and rejoin our main forces. With Thunder Catherine at their side, I'm sure they can cut a path to the gates well enough, and from what I've heard, you and Lady Rhea are no slouches when it comes to combat, either. Seath frowned somewhat. While I'm not entirely pleased with your backup plan being a few surprises, the rest of your idea is tactically sound. Well done, Duke Regan. Full marks, as always. Claude just chuckled. Always a teacher, huh, Seath? Should I start calling you Professor, or would that be weird? I would prefer it if you spoke comfortably with me, Duke Regan. Although I truly do enjoy being a teacher, I am primarily an advisor to Lady Rhea and a minister of the church. If I did not hold her trust, it would be Lady Rhea alone who spoke to you today. Speaking of Lady Rhea, isn't it weird that she's still gone? This is really an important meeting for her to be missing, Claude stressed. Yes, it truly is unlike her. There is one issue that I would like to discuss before I depart. Your plan is very tactically sound, and the idea of Lester and Faergus joining hands once more fills me with joy. However, although I am not privy to the direct dealings of the Alliance, I am aware of their temperaments. They are a group that would be wholly displeased with this idea. I could see them creating an armistice of a sort with the Empire, but never with Faergus. How do you intend to convince them, if you do at all? Claude suddenly gave a somewhat proud look. Well, there's really no need for that. Before I took off running, the 5 great lords held one final round-table conference, and we all came to one conclusion: our current model of government just wasn't suited for wartime. That being said, we all came to an agreement we needed one strong ruler, who could be relied upon to make decisions in the stead of the other lords. The votes were tallied, and the person we chose was me. Dimitri's eyes went wide. Then, that means dash. Claude pointed to himself. Yep. You're currently speaking to the new king of the Leicester Federation. Despite everything, Dimitri found himself smiling. So, how is it? The burden of being a king. Claude let out a short laugh. Honestly, for now, it's in its honeymoon period. It's nice to be able to just sit down, sign a paper, and make things happen. I'm sure I'll feel the weight after holding it for a while, though. I can't imagine doing what you do all the time, Dimitri. Yes, well, it is nice to be of service to my people. If there is a way I can make their lives better, it is my duty to provide, and now, it's your duty as well. All right, enough of the pep talk. I'm aware just as much as you are of how important this position is. Hopefully, we'll get this war straightened out in a couple of moons and we can all be done before winter starts hitting us too hard again, and things can go back to normal. Not a huge fan of all the pomp and circumstance, but I see where it's needed. Seath spoke up once more. You've done well in changing the Leicester Alliance to suit its needs, Claude, and for that, I am proud of you. Just do not forget your duty to yourself as well as your people. It is all well and good to take command when necessary, but you must also learn how to relinquish power once you no longer need it. Yeah, I hear you. Good people have fallen to worse. I understand the situation, don't worry about me, Seath. Claude's smile was starting to crack somewhat. Dimitri spoke up once more. Seath, perhaps you should make haste in your search for Lady Rhea. I shudder to imagine what she may be doing to poor Geralt. Seath startled somewhat, apparently realizing what he was originally going to do. Yes, you're right. I will take my leave for now. It was excellent seeing you both again. Claude waved as Seath departed, leaving only himself, Claude, and Didu in the room. There was a fragile silence holding between the pair, and Claude was the first to break it. Say, Dimitri. What are you going to do with the Central Church once this war is over? That is a complicated question. My people still rely heavily on them. So long as that is the case, I will always unconditionally offer them shelter. So, what if they didn't? Let's say your people decided tomorrow that they didn't want to house the Central Church anymore. Would you be able to kick Seath and Rhea to the streets? What about everyone else in the Knights of Syros? Dimitri sent a warning look to Claude. It's an interesting hypothetical, but such a day would likely never dawn. Territories, rulers, and names may change, but in the end, the hearts of men are stubborn things. I doubt they would be accepting of a church under a different name, even if they worshipped the same goddess. The people of Faerghus are hardy people, but they are also set in tradition. Recklessly casting aside the Central Church would be impossible. It is the only life they have ever known in some cases, it is the only way they can even survive. You're talking about Sreng, aren't you? Claude's voice was world-weary, and stressed beyond his years. Indeed. The Central Church propagates the crest system of nobility, and while I fail to see the benefits in almost all circumstances, in some others, it is downright necessary. The Margrave of Gautier has historically always been the one to protect the entirety of Faerghus from assaults from the north. Without the Lance of Ruin, it may even be impossible for the land to survive. You said earlier that you wanted diplomacy to be an option, that people should reach harmony equally. Don't you think that's possible with Sreng? With Sreng? As things stand, no, I do not. It is difficult to admit, but the people of Sreng will likely always be at war with Faerghus. They lack fertile lands, and they have no manner of sustaining a large population on their own. There is no diplomatic solution that does not require us to give up land, because I doubt that they will accept any other outcome. It is all they need to survive, and it is typically all that they fight for. But has anyone tried? Dimitri, when is the last time that Faerghus really negotiated with another territory? With Sreng, with Albania, heck, with anyone outside of Fodlan? I trust your words, but at the same time, with the dogma of the Central Church, it's impossible for anyone to communicate with the outside world. There are things happening, cultures flourishing, science progressing, and we're missing all of it. If only we could be more open, we could reach peace a bit more effectively. Claude, his words had seemed so passionate, this must have been personal. Sorry, Dimitri. I probably overstepped there. Faerghus has been dealing with this for forever now, and I'm just an outsider. No, it's quite alright. I welcome it, actually. It's heartwarming to see such passion come from another about a topic like this. Truth be told, it would be wonderful if Sreng and Faerghus could come to peace. I do not wish for the people of Sreng to suffer in the way that they do. However, at the same time, it's nearly impossible for us to coexist because of their way of life compared to ours. One of my closest friends, Sylvain, will eventually have to take up the mantle of Margrave Gautier and defend our border, but nothing would make me happier than if he never had to suffer that burden. His family has been fractured by the presence of crests, and his brother, Miquelon, eventually turned to banditry. Claude seemed a little bit surprised, and his hand went to his hip. Seems like you've been thinking about this a lot. Claude, all I wish for is for a world where the meek do not have to fight to survive. Sylvain did not shed a single tear when his brother died, not the day of, not the day after, and not a single day since. Perhaps after this war is over, we can attempt to change this world. It isn't fair that people have to be constrained to roles based on their birth. But if that change requires the destruction of the Central Church, if it requires causing untold strife and pain for my citizens, then it is a change that must be made step by step, instead of all at once. But, therein lies the problem. I believe your words, but I also know that you'll never be able to cast aside the Central Church. Aren't I right, Dimitri? Claude seemed imperceptibly sad, his mouth tilted downwards just enough for Dimitri to tell that he was fighting back an outright frown. It isn't that I agree with all of their policies, or even that I trust all of their leaders. I have not even told Lady Rhea that Edelgard still lives, after all. But their faith protects us. It is what legitimizes me as king, and it is one of the only things that continues to hold this country together. Without the Central Church, I fear that this country would not be able to survive the following revolts. Oh, is that all? Is that all, he says. You speak as though you have an easy answer to this issue. Well, I wouldn't exactly call it an easy answer to the issue, but it's, definitely an answer. I've never denied your counsel before, Claude, and I'm not about to start now. I'm willing to listen. Claude looked uncharacteristically nervous. So, you remember the idea I brought up earlier? Dimitri blinked. We have had a very long conversation, Claude. Please be somewhat more specific. You know, the whole thing. You know. Dimitri stared blankly as Claude waved his arms around, until it finally clicked. Are you speaking of a political marriage? Yeah, that's the one. It's kinda awkward to bring it up again, considering how vehemently against it you were, but dash. Claude, I fail to see how getting married to Edelgard will solve the issue of succession to the throne of Faerghus. But that's the thing, you wouldn't have to get married to Edelgard. I mean, you could, but it would definitely defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do here. If everything goes well here, the Empire should be really, really tiny when we're done with it. No, I had a different idea. Claude was quiet for a long moment afterwards, and slowly, the dots started to connect in his mind. Claude, you cannot possibly be suggesting what I think you are. Don't be too against the idea from the outset, it's not the worst I've come up with. The last time you said that, we almost got killed by bandits. Look, it's not anything life-threatening. It obviously wouldn't even mean anything between us. Claude, you are suggesting that we get married solely to be rid of the Central Church. The people of Leicester would never accept it, let alone the people of Faerghus. I'm expected to produce an heir even now, and that is obviously impossible with you. Relaxy, Your Majesty. Hear me out before you make any big decision, and if you don't like it, then you can shoot me down, how about it? Claude replied flippantly. Dmitri huffed, but ultimately acquiesced. Good. Now, I can see the look on your face, and I want to promise you that this idea doesn't suck as bad as it sounds, alright? It's really very simple. If we get married, we can tie together our two nations politically. Then, since I'm the king of Leicester, I have a legitimate claim to power, one that you can leech off of when we remove Rhea from power. So long as I'm king of the United Leicester and Fairgus, whoever I'm married to will have that same ruling power. The ruling system of the alliance is vastly different from the kingdom, I know, but if our two nations work together, we should be able to flawlessly bring them under one unified flag, one that won't fall even if you lose the support of the Central Church. Then, once the dust has settled, we have a falling out, and you take the kids and Fairgus back in the divorce. Easy, right? Didn't you say that you would only be king so long as this war persisted? Ah, well, I get the feeling that this position will last if we end up going to war with the Knights of Syros right after dealing with the Empire. Begrudgingly, Dmitri did consider the plan. It isn't the worst thing I've ever heard, he admitted, but I still do not like it, for the reasons that I've outlined earlier. Claude's voice was sympathetic as he responded, Dmitri, if anything, you're the Edelgard in this situation. That's why I'm asking you this sincerely. If you want to truly be rid of the crest system, to get rid of the dogmatic and outdated views of the Central Church while still maintaining your hold over Fairgus, this is an option. If you don't like it, you can feel free to say no. I'm willing to help you out no matter what. If you do say yes, though, I'm willing to look the other way if you snag a pretty lady friend every now and then, if that's what you're worried about. I could introduce you to Marianne, she's single, I think. Dmitri barked out a laugh. Ha! Now that's a lark. As for the proposal itself, I will have to decline. Although it is a rather solid idea, I don't want to drag you into the kingdom's issues. If the absolute removal of the Central Church is what you're after, then, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure an alliance between us will survive past this war. Claude's eyes softened. Well, it was worth a shot. I didn't really expect you to say yes, anyways. Besides, that thing about the Central Church, if anything, it's Rhea and Rhea alone who's the problem. If everyone was like Seath, things would be a whole lot easier. I'll completely drop the whole idea if she's out of power, what'd ya say? Dmitri curled his hand around his chin. Yes, that may work, actually. We are providing asylum to the church as it is, perhaps we can negotiate towards making Seath the archbishop over Rhea. I wouldn't hold your breath over that one, but it's an avenue worth looking into. What we need is a successor for Rhea, someone who she's absolutely willing to hand power over to without question. Hopefully, it's someone she hasn't sunk her claws into, someone willing to reform the Central Church and make it less of a government and more of a proper religion. I doubt we'll find someone like that, but if we do, they'll be our free meal ticket to building that world of yours. If everything works out, I really would like this alliance to last, Dmitri. Claude seemed genuinely sincere. Dmitri allowed himself to smile in response. I as well, Claude. It would be lovely if we could return to the days of the Officers' Academy, where we could all live peaceably amongst each other. Until we settle this war, however, I do not know how possible that will be. Well, speaking of the Officers' Academy, one of the few things I remember from that time was the feasts that the Blue Lions held. We were no slouches when it came to food over in the Alliance, but you all had us beat. Annette could put down food like no other. No idea where that girl put that stuff, and that's not even counting Ingrid. I trust you'll put on a grand feast, in honor of our newly formed alliance. Claude's smile was mischievous, and for once, he didn't feel threatened by it, rather, he felt supremely reassured. Of course, my good friend. Tonight, we dine in honor of our alliance, and in honor of Leicester's new king. What's the matter, kid? Your heart isn't in it today. Byleth was almost sweating, not from the exertion, but from one of the most powerful gazes he had ever felt. Byleth, I don't like the way that woman is looking at us. I know. She's creepy. I know. Can we leave? Say you're not feeling well. Or that you have to go to the bathroom, or something. Just get us out of here. I'm not feeling well. I have to go to the bathroom, or something. Byleth abruptly lowered his sword, ending the training session and briskly walking away from the training grounds in the opposite direction of the woman despite Geralt's wide eyes watching after him. He did not get far before he ran into someone in the halls of Fhirdiad. He almost collided headfirst with a tall man with dark green hair. Seath, he believed. Dimitri had told him that they were coming today. "Ah, you look, by any chance, are you Geralt's son? I have something to ask of you," Seath asked, a hard-set line to his face. "Say no. This guy looks just as creepy as she did." "Yes. Argyur so dash. I see. By any chance, would you happen to have seen Lady Rhea nearby? I believe she was looking for you." "I don't know who that is." Seath blinked, very slowly. "She is the Archbishop of the Church of Syros. Her hair is a similar color to mine, and she wears a complicated head-dress. She is difficult to miss. Last I heard, she was headed to the courtyard." "Oh. She was in the courtyard. Did she speak to you at all?" "No. That's strange. She seemed eager to meet you. I ran away from her. She was creepy." "I see." The pair were silent for a long moment. Byleth spoke up first. "You're one of the most tolerable people to speak to here." "Thank you, I get that often. Teach me how to talk to people." "I would." The older man seemed genuinely befuddled. "People call me creepy often. I don't want to be like that woman. You're the first person I've met who is tolerable and sociable at the same time. Yes, this is a good idea. I do not wish to continue guiding you through every single interaction you hold." Seath sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You are aware that I am with the church, yes? I am in close proximity to that woman, as you so delicately put it, very frequently. If you interact with me, you will likely interact with her. She was already staring at me. She will continue to stare at me whether you are there or not. That is very well. I imagine that you will not let up on this issue, will you?" "No." And, with that, Byleth's somewhat secret training began. Only after Seath hid him in a broom cupboard to keep Rhea away from him, that is. Chapter 3, Azure Gleam Conspiracy Before Dawn. Geralt was used to his son being eccentric. Byleth was strange in all the wrong ways. His son hadn't cried a single day since he was born. When he talked, his words were short, and the expression on his face never changed. He could act mercilessly when he needed to, and while that was helpful for a mercenary, it made him feel like he failed as a father at times. At other times, his eccentricities resulted in strange situations occurring. Recently, his son would talk to nobody, having a full conversation with someone that did not exist. When pressed for details, he simply gave a flat look and said he was speaking with Suthies as though the goddess had his ear personally. Geralt was used to those eccentricities. He could deal with them. They were normal in their strangeness, and at the very least, they were predictable. This was not predictable. "Kid, what are you doing up there?" he called out cautiously. Byleth was currently perched up in the rafters in the dining hall. Well, he called it a dining hall, but that gave it the impression of it being small. The dining hall in Fhirdiad's castle was absolutely massive, and as such, it had a massive ceiling. The rafters were easily far enough off the ground for something important to break if he fell. "That woman can smell me, I'm certain of it," was Byleth's only reply. He didn't even know how to begin to address that. "Look, kid, if you're having lady troubles as he spoke, the doors to the dining hall burst open, and Geralt's eyes were immediately drawn to the doors. They, like everything else in this demmed castle, were too big to be reasonable, and it took effort to open them at that speed, which meant that there were only a few people who had the strength to open the doors like that. His heart dropped into his stomach as he locked eyes with the person who entered. "Ah, Geralt, it has been quite a long time. It is good fortune that we should meet here today." Rhea's eyes were warm and motherly, and that sent warning signals down his spine. "Yes, it has been quite a long time. Strange that we should meet here. I thought you were, a couple villages down the way." He coughed, trying not to give off the impression that he wanted to be anywhere but here at this moment. He resolutely refused to look up even as Rhea stepped closer and grabbed his arm. "Come now, Geralt, you seem so tense. Is it so strange that I had business with King Dimitri? I certainly didn't expect to encounter you or your little band while I was here. The goddess must have blessed me with good fortune on this day. How do I get out of this? Yes, I'm sure she has. I apologize, Lady Rhea, but is there something you needed from me? I'm sure you wouldn't be here for no reason. I could say the same of you, Geralt. It isn't every day that you're seen wandering around a dining hall with no one else in sight. Were you looking for something? Or perhaps someone? Her eyes darted around the dining hall at a rapid pace, and Geralt was suddenly gripped by the realization that this must be who Byleth was talking about. Gods above, he had to distract Rhea. The things he did for his son. I was just, looking for my flask. Left it here last night during the feast. Didn't want to be left without it, you know? Say, speaking of that, it's been a really long while since we've talked. Do you want to, go out on the town for a while? Rhea paused, looking genuinely surprised. Are you certain, Geralt? I thought for sure you wanted nothing to do with me, since this was so uncomfortable. Well, after everything that happened with Citrai, things just didn't feel right. I couldn't deal with it, and after the fire, I just had to go. It wasn't anything personal. If anything, you were one of the better parts of living at the monastery. So, what do you think about going out and catching up? For old time's sake. Was lying to the Archbishop something that would get him sent to the eternal flames once he kicked the bucket? Rhea gently clasped his hand between her own. That would be wonderful, Geralt. Slowly, he let himself be led out of the dining hall, resigning himself to one of the worst nights out on the town he'd had since the kid was born. As they left the dining hall, he glanced back and made direct eye contact with Byleth, hoping to convey with a single look exactly how much trouble the boy would be in later. Byleth's wide eyes reassured him that the message was received. I have a theory. Byleth, I don't like it when you get theories. I think Rhea is my mom. I hate your theories. They suck. It would explain a lot. No, it wouldn't. If she were your mother, she wouldn't be so creepy. But people call me creepy all the time. Maybe I picked it up from her side. Okay, no, people call you creepy because you act like a robot. What's a robot? I don't actually know. The term just seemed to fit. The point is, you have about as much personality as a training dummy. Why, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't know how to show any emotion at all. I know. Thank you, Suthies. Finally, some appreciation. That aside, however, it seems we will have some questions to ask Geralt when we see him next. What his relationship is to Rhea, who this Citrai person is, and what happened in our past. My past. It is our past. I just wasn't awake for it. Okay. And if that woman is your mother, then I don't want her. I don't care how familiar she feels, she is not related to us. Byleth, if she says as much, you are to reject her immediately. Okay. Good boy, well done. It seems like you are finally learning how to listen to your elders. You look 12. I'm only agreeing with you so you don't yell at me. Why, you dash. Dimitri knocked on the door. May I enter? After a moment, a familiar voice responded. Yeah, sure, feel free. Not doing anything else right now. Gently, he opened the door, making eye contact with their resident mercenary friend. How are you feeling, Shay? I've been better. I've also been worse, so that's something. He gave her a sympathetic look, and her smile turned strained. After her battle with Byleth, Shay had been completely bedridden for 3 moons. It seems that the fight had been concluded by the Ashen Demon stabbing her straight through the stomach. Unfortunately, that resulted in him damaging her spine, forcing her to relearn to walk with severely weakened legs. It had only been thanks to constant faith magic that she had even healed at all. However, too much strain and she would relapse in her condition. That isn't to say that she had been idle in the past moons, however. While many of the Blue Lions had been dispatched to different parts of the war front, she had been hard at work in Fhirdiad, studying dark magic and learning its applications. She could still summon her sword, but it was now more so a tool for conducting magic than anything else. Have you been able to move any better recently? She gave him a sad look. I managed a light jog earlier for a few minutes. I think I'll just be better on the back lines for now, though. Shay, I am so dash. Don't say it, Dimitri. I've already heard enough. I was the one who made the choice to fight the Ashen Demon. I made that decision on my own. It was no different from you choosing to fight Edelgard. Please, don't take that choice away from me. It wasn't your fault that I became like this. It was no one's, really. That's just how war goes. Besides, give it a few more moons and I'll be right as rain. Sympathy flooded him, and although he knew she would be upset at him, he couldn't help but pity her. She had survived the Battle of Arianrhod, but it was all for naught. The fortress was rubble. Everything she had sacrificed was for nothing, and now they were even granting asylum and working with the very man who caused her to be bedridden. He wouldn't fault her if she hated him. Seriously, I see that look on your face, Dimitri. I'm not an invalid, I'm just out of the fight for a bit. I'm still your commander, and I'll still be back on the battlefield soon. Yes, you're right. My apologies, Shay. The words felt hollow in his ears. Yeah. Hey, I heard the news. We're buddying up with the Alliance, right? Or, sorry, the Federation. Indeed. Our next campaign will begin soon. If that's the case, then I'm gonna show you just how far I've gotten. You can count on me, Diddy. He let out a sigh. Not you too. Happy had taken to calling him that frequently. The nickname wasn't entirely unwelcome, but it was somewhat demeaning when it had spread to some of the Blue Lions. He didn't want to imagine how troublesome it would be if it got much further. His pride as a king would vanish. Hey, what's wrong with it? I think it's cute. Whittle Diddy, going out to save the world. Her tone was teasing, but there was a genuine smile on her face, something that gave him pause in genuinely rejecting the idea. Well, if that's what you would prefer to call me, then, he spoke begrudgingly. Wait, seriously? I was just joking. I wasn't gonna call you that if it made you uncomfortable. I don't wish to be called that, but dash. Nope, too late, you already gave me permission. Diddy it is. He let out a sigh upon seeing her victorious smile. Truly a troublesome woman. Not for the first time, Edelgard was left alone in her room. It was, all things considered, a very luxurious room. When compared to her room in Inver, it obviously fell short, but the accommodations were suitable for visiting royalty. Had she not been a hostage, she may have even felt flattered. There were usually at least 2 guards at her door. Sometimes, there was only one Dimitri's hulking vassal. Despite his rough exterior, Didu had proven himself to have a kind soul, and the tales he told of Dimitri were comical. She had no idea the king of Faerghus made a habit out of eating weeds, to the point where Didu had to personally monitor him every time he entered a garden. It became less funny when he told her that the reason he did so was because Dimitri had lost all sense of taste after the tragedy. Her isolation was, at the very least, lessened by the presence of some of the Blue Lions. It was vastly different from being surrounded by those she trusted, but ironically, the fact that the kingdom had forced her allies to surrender was working in her favor for now. Dorothea visited regularly, and her presence helped her through all of this. Dimitri had come to grill her for information multiple times, and she made certain to lead him in loops with what she told him. She would be all right by the end of the moon, she estimated, but everything she knew could be told in a single afternoon. The door creaked open, and she turned her attention back away from the window to greet a familiar face. I greet you, Lady Edelgard. Edelgard gave her a soft smile. Petra. It's good to see you. For what it was worth, Petra looked genuinely happy to see her. I have much regret for being unable to see you. My duties have kept me busy. I've heard. You are Queen of Brigid now, are you not? That is correct. I am filled with happiness to be seeing you now. Petra looked radiant. There was a proud smile on her face, and somehow, she looked even more beautiful than ever. Becoming queen had filled her with an unshakable confidence. it seemed. It was a wondrous look on her. I'm proud of you. Truly. I am sorry that we had to meet like this, but there is no reason for your apologies. I am the one who must apologize, I feel. Had I not failed you, I would not be here today, and you would be in Bear. Petra's eyes seemed set at the idea. Petra, are you happy here? The other woman seemed to consider it deeply, tilting her head to the side. I was having much happiness with the Empire. I was making many friends and connections. However, the people of the kingdom are kind and loyal. I have met many good people here. I cannot say I am as happy as I was, but I am content. Edelgard lowered her head, staring at the bedsheets. I see. She hadn't expected Petra to be happy. By all rights, Petra's situation was worse than her own. She had been forced into a foreign land and required to learn a different language and customs, all because her nation had been subjugated by another. Now, the empire that held her hostage was collapsing at the seams, and the reins holding back her country had simply been passed to a new person. Edelgard was used to her life being held in the hands of another. She had raged against those hands, rebelling each and every step that they forced her to dance. She had promised to make them pay, allowed hate to fill her core, and waged a continental war to change Fodlan forever, hopefully for the better. Petra's strength of character shouldn't shock her anymore, but she still found herself marveling at the strength she displayed constantly. In the face of that courage, all she could manage to choke out was, "I'm glad you've adapted so well. I was worried for all of you when I heard that you had been forced to surrender." Petra tilted her head. "It is not so bad. I am filled with much disquiet when I have to fight my former comrades, but Dmitri is quite forgiving. He does not force me to fight. But he does request it of you, doesn't he?" Edelgard pressed. "Yes, that is true. But, there are times," Petra trailed off, looking unsure. Worry filled her heart. "Petra, you know you can share anything with me. I would be a poor emperor if I could not listen to the woes of my trusted friends." Petra turned her eyes away, refusing to make eye contact. "There are times when I wish to fight more. The kingdom is growing at a rapid pace. I wish to keep up with them, especially since I must." Edelgard nodded mutely. She knew about Petra's ultimate goal. Her lifelong enemy was Count Bergliez, one of the Empire's most prolific fighters and the primary reason the Eastern Front had not fallen to the Alliance. Until that man was dead, she would not rest. The kingdom is rather admirable in its hardiness. There are worse groups to take after. Edelgard agreed, taking a drink of water from the basin beside her bed. Petra nodded sagely. "Indeed. I am making many friends in my training. There is one I am finding particularly kind. I wish to take him home with me." Edelgard swallowed wrong, immediately coughing and barely stopping herself from spraying water all over the bed. Petra was by her side immediately, rubbing her back as she coughed. "Petra," she managed to get out through watery eyes, "I do not believe that means what you think it means." She frowned. "Oh no, did I say something incorrect again? My deepest apologies. I can only assume that you meant that you wish to take him to Brigid, correct? If that's the case, please say something like, 'I wish to show him my home country,' because what you said has very different connotations." "I see. I give you my thanks, Lady Edelgard. But what was so wrong with what I said?" Petra's smile was earnest, and it almost broke her heart to have to say this. Petra looked so innocent, smiling sweetly like that, and she couldn't bear to say the words. "It's something that you should ask someone like Sylvain. That fool could explain it far better than I could. By your command, Lady Edelgard, I shall. In fact, I shall go do that right now." Petra stood and began to march from the room instantly, a pep in her step that had not been there previously. "Petra, wait She was already gone. Edelgard's head fell into her hands. What have I done? The last person who had yet to visit Edelgard was Bernadetta. Truth be told, she wasn't expecting her to visit at all, not because Bernadetta disliked her, but because it was against her nature to seek out potentially dangerous situations, or really, any situation that forced her to leave whatever dark corner she had holed herself up in. That was why she was surprised when the girl showed up by her bed one day, almost completely unprompted. Hello, Lady Edelgard, the skittish girl began. Edelgard just gave her a sympathetic smile. Even now, when she was in no condition to be scolding her, Bernadetta was still frightened. It is good to see you, Bernadetta. Have you been well? I think so. They don't really make me do much, and I have my own little house in the camp, Bernadetta trailed off, going red. Edelgard's eyes narrowed. Bernadetta, have you been hiding in the storehouses again? She sighed, exasperated. The Black Eagles strike force had done their best to coax Bernadetta out of her shell, but it seemed that one loss was enough for the girl to slam her walls back up. And no. I've been Bernadetta wailed, her legs pumping comically fast as she ran from the room. Edelgard stared after her, absolutely befuddled. Had she done something to warrant that type of behavior from Bernadetta? Or, perhaps, had something happened in her absence? Something foul curled in her gut, and she scowled as she looked out the window once more to see the streets of Fhirdiad. Down below, the people were all bustling about. It must be nice, she thought, to be so unaffected by the war. It was frustrating seeing them go about their business as though her empire wasn't collapsing under its own weight. The door opened once more, and Edelgard wrenched her attention back to her visitor. Standing in the door was Dido, and she allowed her frown to persist. She was hoping that Bernadetta had returned. My apologies, Lady Edelgard. Bernadetta has been skittish recently. If you wish, I could tell you about how she is doing. Dido's words were kind and respectful, and more importantly, sincere. His loyalty to Dimitri was perhaps the only thing that would have prevented her from attempting to snatch him up for the empire. She needed a stoic sort who could bring together the quirky nature of her old classmates. That would be lovely, Dido, seeing as how she does not wish to speak to me herself. Edelgard bit out, not truly meaning her words. She knew what Bernadetta was like, knew her personality, and more importantly, knew her traumas. She could not blame her for fleeing. Surprisingly, Dido shook his head. It is not that she does not wish to speak to you, rather, she feels as though she does not deserve to. Her worries have compounded time and time again, and seeing you was overwhelming for her. You need only to give her time, and she will come to you of her own volition once more. Despite her actions, she truly does miss you. Edelgard considered his words, letting out a sigh. I know. Bernadetta is a truly kind soul. I wished she didn't have to endure the hardships that come with building a new world. I worry that the sight of me reminded her of her perceived obligation to aid me. Once more, Dido refuted her. I would argue that her obligation to aid you is one that she has accepted on her own. It is all that drives her, some days. She fought with the will to return to you alive, even when she had to face old friends. Her hidden strength is immense, and she has truly been a boon to His Highness and all of us. She glanced at him, a small smile forming on her face. You seem to have gotten to know her well. Slowly, Dido nodded. We have bonded over a love of nature. I enjoy spending my time gardening, and she has a vast knowledge of plants. I sought to make her feel more welcome within the army, and so I approached her every day. Eventually, she was able to get over my heritage and we learned to accept each other as people. Edelgard tilted her head. While it was somewhat amusing to learn that Dimitri's vassal, who was infamous for his ability to waltz through any attack undamaged, had a green thumb, there was something far more pressing on her mind. Your heritage. Yes. As you may know, I am a man of Duscur. Following the tragedy, my people were persecuted and hated throughout the kingdom and beyond. His Highness is the only one who spoke for the innocence of my people, and he is likely the reason my people still live today. He has fought tirelessly for us, and only recently has our name been fully cleared thanks to your words. We are still regarded with distrust, however, and dash. She laughed. Goddess forgive her, she laughed. Dido had stopped talking, staring at her with an expression mixed with unease and doubt. She recovered quickly, waving her hand. My apologies. I don't mean to laugh at you, or your story. I've heard of the persecution of Duscur, and of Dimitri's efforts. I thought it was very kind of him to do. However, I feel there is something for me to clear up on Bernadetta's behalf. The reason she found it hard to speak with you was because you're big, Dido. Dido blinked, very slowly. She found me intimidating because of my size. I imagine many people would. You strike a rather imposing figure. Edelgard replied humorously. My apologies. I assumed something uncouth of Bernadetta. The thought never crossed my mind because she had shown herself to be far more capable than she seems. On multiple occasions, she has disarmed Felix, and so I assumed she would not be concerned with my size. Bernadetta disarmed the shield of Faerghus? How surprising. I didn't know Bernie had it in her. Their conversation continued on for a few minutes before Dido went quiet once more, staring off to the side. After a quiet moment between them, he spoke. There is a purpose to my visit today. His Highness has sent me to inform you that the kingdom will be continuing our conquest to the west. Edelgard's teeth clicked together as she shut her mouth. The idea left a foul taste in her mouth. Her empire was being ransacked by the kingdom, and they were right to do so. It had been proliferated and destabilized by the Agarthans. There was nothing she could do but wait until she recovered before she blazed a path to Inber to reclaim her throne. With that being said, there is the matter of your security, Dido continued resolutely. She felt like laughing. My security? I'm just a prisoner. There's no need for Dimitri to worry about me so much. I'm in no condition to run, either, if that's his concern. Dido countered instantly. Although you two may have been enemies, His Highness still cares for you. He would not have nursed you back to health against the wishes of his advisors if he did not. Please trust my words when I say that he earnestly wishes to reach peace with you. She fell silent, turning to look out the window once more, and Dido continued on. All of the members of the Black Eagle's strike force will remain within Fhirdiad, alongside Geralt's mercenaries, Happy, and Yuri. Her head snapped back to meet his gaze, suspicion instantly flaring up within her. That's foolish of him. He's allowing his greatest threats free rein of the capital. Dido looked somewhat uncomfortable. I have advised him against this course of action. However, he insisted, and I will follow His Majesty's command. She scoffed and made herself comfortable in her bed once more. I see. Was there anything else? No, there was not. I shall take my leave now, Lady Edelgard. Dido turned and left her to stew in her own thoughts. Dimitri's behavior was irrational. It simply didn't make sense to her. Why would he treat her this kindly? There was an argument to be made that he truly did care for her, but their time at the academy was so brief that there was surely no time for such a connection to be made. They had hardly spoke outside of their usual house leader duties. Unless. There was a sinking feeling in the back of her mind. There was one explanation which could make sense: he was aiming for a marriage, political or otherwise. The thought of his hands on her revolted her. She would have to do her best to discourage him, to make herself as undesirable as possible. If her assumption was wrong, then she would lose nothing. She desired nothing from Dimitri aside from his cooperation, anyways. If he merely stood out of her way when she killed Rhea, then she would forgive him for any crime, past or future. That was all their relationship needed to be. Thinking about it more critically, her theory gained more and more credence. His was the second face she saw when she awoke, and he had been exceptionally kind and courteous to her thus far. He allowed her soldiers to go without requesting anything from them, he housed Geralt's mercenaries without a single complaint, and now he would leave 3 of her most trusted friends behind while he went to war. His vassal treated her with respect and referred to her as Lady Edelgard, and he had even spread a false rumor of her death in order to keep assassins at bay. Had someone like Claude done even half of what Dimitri had done, there would be absolutely no doubt that he was using her as a political tool. Her mind was made up. Dimitri was not to be trusted, regardless of how sincere he may seem. There was something she was missing, some critical piece of information that wasn't available to her, and until she figured it out, she absolutely had to hold out until she could escape. Shay shivered in her chair, watching forwards as Dimitri wheeled her to the gates. She was capable of walking around town well enough, but her days of sprinting around the camp like a madwoman were over for the time being, and while she could have walked to come see their visitors, she didn't know how long this meeting would run for or what would be needed of her afterwards. Hence the compromise. I gotta say, it's nice having the King of Faerghus wheel me around camp. I'll gladly do this whenever you require it of me. You have only to say the word. Such a perfect gentleman. You know there are, like, hundreds of people who will do the same thing, right? You don't have to waste your time on me. Dmitri huffed. You're one of my valued friends. Helping you could never be a waste of time. She just sighed. Arguing with him when he got like this was impossible. Whatever you say, Dmitri. They were just about to begin assault on Imperial lands, and as a commander, she was needed. Although she would be in the rear guard, she could still help out. Today, though, the purpose for Dmitri's presence in particular was because Claude planned to send a special surprise for them. That surprise became evident when they reached the front gate, their gatekeeper giving them a salute. 3 familiar faces met theirs, and Ignatz, standing at the front, gave them a little wave. She returned it, a small smile on her face. During her small stint at the academy, she had found that several of the Golden Deer students were nice, and Ignatz was kinda cute in a nerdy way. The 3 of them gave short introductions. Raphael, Ignatz, and Marianne were sent from the Federation to supplement their forces, free of charge. Claude apparently sent them without telling them what the plan was, but since they were here, they would help out. Dmitri just looked put out by the whole situation. It was kinda funny, in retrospect. Those 3, have you considered what their role here will be? Arvel, her resident friend who lived in her mind that only she could see and she was 75% sure was real, spoke up. What? Aren't they just here to help us? She responded, confused. Well, perhaps, but Claude isn't the trustworthy sort. I imagine that they're here as some kind of scheme of his. What it could possibly be is beyond me, but I bet they're here to spy on us. You need to stop being so paranoid. These people are our friends. Lawrence was supposed to come, too, but Claude called it off at the last minute. Said something had come up on the war front. I think he was just scared of losing my muscles, haha. Raphael boisterously laughed. Dmitri curled his hand around his chin. I see, Shay, where do you think we should put them? She paused, momentarily flustered. Me. Yes. You've been helping manage our troop movements for quite some time now. I imagine you'll have a better idea of how to best utilize their forces than I would. Dmitri gave her a kind smile, which did nothing to eliminate the flustered feeling in her stomach. All right, well, the way I see it is that we have 2 options. We can either bring them with us with you on the front lines, or I can take them in the rear guard and have them help indirectly. With the way the war is right now, I think having them in the front would be best. We'll need a lot of support at the front if we want this strategy to work. He looked momentarily surprised before smiling. Yes, I suppose that would be best. In that case, you 3 are under my direct command. It's wonderful to have you. What was that look for, Dmitri? Did you think I was taking them for myself? We'll do our best. You won't be disappointed, Dmitri. Ignatz clenched his hand, a stalwart smile on his face despite the chill. Of that, I have no doubt. It didn't take long for the 3 of them to integrate into camp. The Blue Lions knew how to welcome new friends. It didn't take long for Ignatz and Ash to start talking, for example. Raphael managed to strike up a good conversation about his workout routine, and Marianne eventually got dragged into conversation with Mercedes. Shay let off a fond smile at seeing everyone working so well together. Looking at this, they may actually have a chance at winning this war. The Kingdom Army blazed their way through the Western Front at a blistering pace. Unfortunately, not everything was going swimmingly. They had successfully subdued the western border between Faerghus and Adrestia with almost comical ease. The enemies were disorganized and lacked skill, but made up for it in sheer numbers. It was simple to take key points of control, but the difficulty became apparent almost immediately afterwards. Towns, villages, and fields had all been razed to the ground before their conquest even began. The people were dying or dead long before they arrived. It would not be too outlandish to say that the Empire sought to stop their supply lines by any means necessary. Dmitri's gauntlets strained as he clenched his fists together. This situation, it could not be permitted. He refused to accept it. And, in this instance, he would cut away what he could not accept. The empire must be brought low or Edelgard must be reinstated, at all costs. There was no third option, no compromise that could be allowed. Your Highness, urgent news. We've received reports that the Western Church has raised an army to strike at our rear flank. Dmitri turned his attention to the messenger. I see. The casualties. Minimal, but the enemy makes to rejoin the Imperial Army and strike again. His voice was gruff, and Dmitri nodded. Very well. I would love to press on, but we must take care of the Western Church first. He turned to rejoin the rest of his army, relaying the news with a harsh face. The Blue Lions seemed perturbed. It's strange that they're building an army now. They've stayed pacifistic up until this point, so what gives? Shay pointed out. I've received reports that there are some of Cornelia's men among the Western Church. I believe they have been infiltrated and poisoned from within. Dmitri rumbled. Typical of them. They have one strategy, and from the looks of it, they're gonna milk it dry. Feliz responded sardonically. Shay looked troubled, glancing away from the group, and Dmitri frowned. Before he could, Mercedes spoke. How terrible, to imagine that the church would be infiltrated by such heinous people. May the goddess save their souls. I'd bet the goddess has no place in the lives of those people, Mercedes. Sylvain quipped darkly. Despite himself, Dmitri couldn't help but nod. To subvert the church is a grand crime, and one that would lead to execution if it were even attempted in the central church. The corruption must run deep if it is allowed to progress this far. It's one of Edelgard's lackeys at the top, Count Varley. He's such a scumbag, this doesn't surprise me at all. Annette cursed. Felix frowned. Slow down there, firecracker. We don't know if it goes that high yet. While I would love to go and kill the bastard myself, for all we know, this could just be a ploy to get rid of him. Ingrid nodded her assent. Indeed. We should focus our efforts on subduing this current assault and worry about the implications later. Normally, I don't like doing things that rashly, but in this case, we have to defend ourselves. We have to fight back against the Western Church. Ash agreed. It's settled, then. Let us move out. The battlefield was a flurry of activity for the next few hours. Simply preparing for an attack required immense logistics, and they had to prepare their strategies accordingly. The Western Church had taken up refuge within an abandoned fortress nearby, and it seems that several citizens had been caught up in their ploy. Hunkered over the strategy table, Dmitri thought carefully about what he had to do. It seems there are citizens trapped in the fortress. We should arrange healers for them, and we should have our engineers work to repair a gate to protect their retreat. Understood. Shay ordered, staring up over the table at the strategists. Understood, Commander. The woman paused, glancing over at Dmitri. That works with your strategies, right? Sorry, I don't want to step on your toes or anything. He glanced over at her. Your strategies have saved us countless times in the past. Have more confidence in yourself. Yeah, I get that, but this is our first major battle where I can't be there to make sure things work out okay. You have to win and come back, okay, Dmitri. He managed a small smile. There will be no worries on that front. This enemy is not someone we would ever lose to. It's a promise, then, right? Her eyes were eerily piercing. A promise, of course. I'll hold you to that, she threatened. He was somewhat bewildered. Not once had she ever acted like this before a battle. She was acting as though something was certain to go wrong. I would expect nothing less. He went to battle with the weight of that promise hanging safely in the back of his mind, with his rage at the front. And, all things considered, the battle was going well. Dmitri was a living tornado of strength, and he was aware of it. He leveraged his strength accordingly, tearing through hordes of enemies with a well-charged attack that would send any and all enemies scattering. Felix moved around him like they were a well-oiled machine, the shield of Faerghus doing his part. The Blue Lions worked around each other with near-perfect synergy, born from years of fighting together. Their fastest fighters Sylvain and Ingrid worked to keep the outermost strongholds taken and defended, while the primary fighting force assaulted the inside of the base and defended the citizens. There was quite the clamor coming for the farthest northeastern room, and he could only hazard a guess that their commander lay in wait there. What didn't make sense to him, however, was the reason for their presence. The church was meant to be a paragon of salvation, yet they had taken citizens hostage. They were, for seemingly no reason at all, indiscriminately slaughtering their people. It was this reason in particular that led him to believe that they were certainly, without argument, infiltrated by the likes of Cornelius' people. It took a fair amount of back and forth, but the kingdom did rescue all of the citizens. With the Federation forces hanging back and the gates prepared to close to cover the evacuation, there was no concern over whether or not the citizens could flee safely. Now, however, the biggest problem was taking out the Western Church. Dmitri was the first through the door when it opened to allow them in. Eridbar flashed out quick as lightning, its potential fully realized with their blacksmith in full working order. It allowed no defense against its attacks, and any soldier in his wake fell before they could respond. He reached the center of the stronghold, and someone pressed against his back. "Sorry to piggyback off of ya, but do you mind if I tag along for the ride? I'm not a big fan of this whole killing civilians thing. Goes against the Merc Code, and all that." Dmitri glanced behind him, seeing that the man in question was a rather large man with gauntlets strapped to his hands. "Very well. The kingdom will accept all comers. Prove your strength, and you'll fit in perfectly." The man grinned. "Heh. Who do you think you're talking to, here? I'm Balthus, the undisputed king of grappling." With that, the man launched into a fury, throwing out attack after attack, each of them devastating. Dmitri's eyes went wide when he realized that it was a hero's relic strapped to his wrists. "Insolent traitor! Who do you think you are?" one man snarled. Dmitri almost immediately singled him out as commander. He was well protected, the entire unit moving according to his commands. If he didn't know better, he would even say that he had seen the man before, although he had no idea where. "You can take your money back, Metode. I don't need it if this is what it costs." Balthus snarled, launching deep into a sea of enemies just to reach the commander. For perhaps the first time, he understood what others meant when they said that he had the tendency to launch himself at the biggest threat with no regard to his safety. The enemy commander, Metode, was no slouch when it came to blade work, although for all the wrong reasons. The man embodied the role of assassin to an unsettling degree, his dagger twisting and turning as he ducked and weaved between punches from Balthus. When he counterattacked, he moved like the snake he acted as, striking like a viper and aiming for nothing but the jugular. For a moment, Dmitri truly feared for their newfound ally, but Balthus proved himself once more, expertly avoiding the swift strikes. He moved in with one final blow, his relic flashing, and landing a solid punch to Metode that very clearly, and very loudly, broke something. A lot of somethings, apparently, as Metode stumbled backwards, blood trickling from his mouth. "Wait, if it's money you want, we can split the loot." Balthus didn't respond, but from his body language, Dmitri could tell that the man was furious. With one more overwhelming punch, Metode went down and stayed that way. Dmitri wasn't one to speak ill of the dead, but standing over the corpse of that man, he couldn't help but mutter, "Good riddance." Ugh. Couldn't agree more. Before they could even rest on their laurels, however, Dido came storming into the room, a pinched expression on his face. "Your Highness, I come with grave news. The true culprits of this attack have shown themselves. They appear to be the same group as Cornelius. We should cut them off as soon as possible." "The same group as Cornelius? So it's true, then that means. Is Thales here?" Dido shook his head. "I have heard no word. It is more likely that it is a lackey of his." Dmitri grit his teeth. "Very well, then. We will proceed as planned. Allow them no quarter. Take their heads, and crush their wicked skulls." The kingdom cheered, and he felt a vicious satisfaction as his ghosts went silent, even if only for a moment. Then Balthus spoke, and the illusion faded. "Hey, I know this might be a bad time, and all, but are you, the actual king of Faerghus, or?" Dmitri watched as his men rushed forwards, and although his ghosts screamed at him, begged for him to kill, to take their worthless heads and hang them from the gates by their entrails. He turned to Balthus, giving a pleasant smile. Of course. My previous offer stands. By the way, the kingdom will take any comers. Oh. You don't say? How's the, gold like? His words were very carefully crafted. Dimitri's smile turned brittle. This was far from the first commander he had ever hired as a mercenary, he had to remind himself. The kingdom's coffers were surely deep enough to handle one more. He hoped. We will compensate you accordingly. Should you perform well in battle, then dash. Balthus dashed off like a man with Hades at his heel, hooting and hollering as he began to tear through the Western Church forces and those who slither in the dark alike. Had he fought any more bravely, he was certain that the man would begin to disrupt and even injure kingdom soldiers as well. A mounting sense of dread began to plant itself in him. Deed turned to him, having finished rallying and directing his own soldiers. Are you certain that hiring this man is wise, Your Highness? He massaged his temples temporarily, raising his eyes to the heavens as though the goddess could offer the answers, as though he would have the means to understand them if she did. I very much so doubt it. Despite his misgivings, with Didu at his side and Balthus parting a sea of red in front, there were no problems in reaching the bulk of the enemy. They were moving as a cohesive unit, although they were having considerable difficulty with both Sylvain and Ingrid at their heels. Where is the rest of the army? Dimitri shouted over the clanging of steel. The Western Church is preparing resonant magic. They are launching an assault from the center, as I predicted. When they finish up there, they are to come aid us. I believe Shay is launching resonant magic as well. Ingrid shouted. Dimitri nodded roughly, his mind clearing at the thought. No need to worry about anyone else, then. Hey, come on, Your Highness, not a word for us? Surely you were worried, right? Sylvain's voice echoed over the madness, a lilt to his voice that immediately gave away the fact that he wasn't serious. That in itself was enough to reassure him. Ingrid let out a groan. We're fine, Your Highness. Focus your attention on the enemy. Dimitri gave a wolfish grin. At your command. The enemy, in this instance, was far more coordinated than the Western Church. They posed a far larger threat, and their magics were far more diabolical. The leader of the group quickly identified himself as Mycen through his insane ramblings. Beasts, I will not be detained by mere beasts. We are to usher in a new world, and I, Mycen, cannot be defeated here. Despite the desperate edge to his voice, or perhaps because of it, he fought hard. His magic served well in keeping them away, although Balthus fought well to keep within his range. Dimitri, however, refused to allow a light hit to be what put him down. I won't be deterred. He roared, hurtling Eridbar into the ground. The sheer concussive force of the impact rolled over the enemies, knocking away some and outright killing others from the sheer impact. With his spear safely in his hands once more, he stared at the heavily breathing monster before him, and he found that the beast within himself paled in comparison to that man's evil. If there is any consolation to this absurdity, it is that even a man as monstrous as I can find foes to fight without care. A swell of magic pulsed from above them, and Mycen looked up, complete confusion written on his face. This magic, Epimenides. Dimitri startled. That name again, they truly are talking about Shay. The resonant dark magic fell like a meteor, and Dimitri found himself shuddering from the sheer malevolence of it. Staring through the heart of the magic as best he could, he attempted to see the outcome of her attack. But when the smoke cleared, Mycen was long gone. Dimitri clenched his fist so tight it hurt. Damn, goddess, damn them to the eternal flames. He was embroiled in anger. He had not felt this level of rage in years. It was different from when he let the madness run loose, when he allowed the boar out of its cage. This anger came from both sides of him, the king and the beast. They had been allowed to escape. The rats had been allowed to scurry away and cower like the vermin they were. This could not be allowed. He could not. Something landed gently on his shoulder, and he whipped his head towards the intrusion, almost snarling, "What?" Ingrid's face was calm, despite his actions. "Your Highness," she began, mulling over her words for a moment, "perhaps we should return to camp. I believe it would be best for all of us if we got some rest." The day has been won. We haven't won at all. They slithered away, they took my father and did his country, and now they dare to hide in the shadows. He forced himself to breathe in slowly, relaxing his still tense shoulders. The boar had to go back in his cage. He could rampage another day. Yes, my apologies, Ingrid. I did not mean to dash. It is all right, Your Highness. I understand. She gave him a kind and sweet smile, and his heart ached for the wonderful people he called his friends, ached for the fact that he had deceived them, ached for the fact that they were forced with him because of his birth. Sylvain approached, eyeing his grip on Eridbar. Wad ya say you put that down for a bit and worry about setting up a feast for us, Your Kingliness. I know your tastes are a bit questionable, but you can get some tables out for the rest of us back at camp while we clean up around here. He glanced down at Eridbar's hilt, noticing only just then how tightly he was grasping it still, tight enough to make his armor creak. Reinforced as it is now, it was difficult to imagine the umbral steel creaking and bending as it once did. He relaxed his grip and tried to contort his expression into something noble, something king-like. Perhaps you're right, Sylvain. It would be best if I took my leave. Without caring for the looks that Balthus and Dida were giving him, he hobbled out of the fortress, away from the torture and blood and madness and screaming, and he slowly worked his way back to camp, not quite home, not quite safe, but better than here. Shay's legs hurt. They hurt kinda bad. A light jog really was all she could manage for about 5 minutes. Anything more than that, and her body just started to, was shut down the right way to put it? Or maybe saying it started to implode would be better. Lawrence had hassled her to learn proper verbiage during her very brief stint at the officers' academy, and she had earned her first detention after breaking his nose. Apparently, doing that is frowned upon in uppity noble schools. Who would have guessed? She's getting sidetracked. Anyways, her legs hurt. Big hoop, right? That happens when your arch-nemesis stabs you in the spine. The problem, though, is that Arvel was desperately pushing her in one direction, his, or was it her? They never discussed that, senses locking onto the magic signal that Mycen had left behind. Normally, she shouldn't be jogging for more than 5 minutes at most, running for maybe 30 seconds at most, and sprinting probably never, at her rate. However, with the rate Arvel was pushing her at, they had been running for close to the last 10 minutes. They had long ago dipped into their awakened form, although that strength was running dry. She didn't really fancy her chances of collapsing in the middle of a field in the middle of the night with nobody around. She would be carrion by the morning. He's here. Shay screeched to a halt, her feet kicking up dust, as a man teleported in front of her. Epimenides, you are, Mycen paused, studying her carefully. You have Harvel what do Isa dash. Don't overstep your place, Mycen. She replied quickly. I see. You seem different, but that voice, Epimenides, certainly resides within this vessel. I thank you for your aid earlier. Without it, that beast may have taken my life. He bowed, and Shay's eye twitched. Sure, rub in my failure more, why don't you? She aimed the resonant magic just a few feet wrong at the last possible second and put way too much power into it. The only person to blame was her. Still, that didn't mean that she needed to be reminded every couple of minutes. Dimitri had come back erect, and she could hazard a guess as to why. Mycen returned to full height. Thales is still following his plans. Am I to assume that you will still be following yours? Panic filled her. Arvel, what is he talking about dash? I don't know, just keep him here. Make something up. Option 1, make something up. Option 2, pretend you didn't hear him. Option 3, try to stab him. Since when did someone like you deserve to hear my plans? You'll do as you're told, when you're told. Am I understood, Mycen? She tried to channel Edelgard's energy as much as possible. That woman had a way of getting what she wanted, when she wanted it. The man's breath hitched, and she had to avoid revulsion from the look of worship in his eyes. So you truly have returned to us, Epimenides. With your power, we can surely destroy that man, the Ashen Demon, and destroy the Fellstar once and for all. Her eyes were wide, and when Mycen looked back up to her, she had to completely smooth out her face in record time. It wasn't difficult when her legs were starting to go numb. She thought for a second, and then a devilishly good idea came to her. "Mycen, I require your assistance." His eyes narrowed, and she wondered if she had made a misstep somewhere. "You have not once come to someone like me for assistance before. What do you require, my lady?" "This is so weird, this is so weird, this is so weird dash. I need to be teleported back to the kingdom camp. My vessel was wounded by the Ashen Demon. I am still recovering my power, and I do not have the energy to spare." He nodded sagely. "I understand, my lady. Correspondence will be difficult within that camp, however, considering the proximity to the rest of the beasts. How do you wish to communicate?" She thought for a moment. "There is an owl that remains outside of my tent. Deliver your messages through him, and I will respond. Now, hurry, I do not believe I can remain standing much longer. And please make it discreet." Mycen nodded unflinchingly, grabbing her arm. "Yes, my lady." The process of the warp was disorienting, much similar to her Shadow Stride ability, but expanded. It felt like trying to reach for something that was on a shelf just a bit too high for her to reach, or like pulling back a bowstring that was just slightly too taut. It was something she could see and picture, an ability she knew that she could one day possess, but it was out of reach for her now, a physiological impossibility. Mycen warped her a safe distance from the camp while still within its reach, somewhere inside the training grounds late at night, and teleported back. Only a few seconds after he was gone did she allow her power to fade, and her legs gave out from under her. Shay. Tears welled up in her eyes. "God, I feel so pathetic right now. Can't even run after the only guy I tried to kill since I got hurt. Are you alright? Can you stand?" "Arvel, sweetie, if I could stand, what makes you think I would not be standing right now?" "I'm sorry. That was a dumb question. It has been a very stressful night." "You're telling me. What was all that back there? What was that guy going on about? He clearly recognized you, and apparently you were some bad bitch in your past life, because I bossed him around and I think he liked it. Can we please not talk about that part?" "Oh, we're talking about that part if you don't start to spill the beans." "I'm sorry, my partner, but I genuinely do not know." "Really? Nothing? Not a single thing is coming to you?" Out of everything he said, none of it hits home. "Well, I wouldn't go that far. Arvel, getting information from you is like pulling teeth. We've done that to other people before. Do you want me to bring the memory back up? I can project it really hard if you don't want to talk." Alright, I get it. I'll admit, the part about the Ashen Demon and the Fell Star, it did ring with some truth. Since the time I was born, I've felt an itch of some sorts. Seeing the demon only aggravated it. Every time I see him, I feel as though my life's purpose is to kill him. It's our destiny. Okay, well clearly not, because that guy was a fucking whack job and we're not doing anything that could help him. Even if it helps him, wouldn't it be beneficial if Arvel, I love you, but I swear to all that is holy, we are not discussing this while I am face first in the dirt of the training grounds. Maybe we can negotiate later, when I'm feeling less like a bitch. I don't blame you for being upset with me. Considering everything that's happened today, I understand your suspicions. I now know that our power definitely has some connections with those people. But, if we can use that power for good, perhaps it would all be worth it." Yeah, I hear why What are you doing out here?" Shay blinked at the harsh voice, twisting her neck up. "Hi, Felix. Were you trying to get more exercise? Didn't you listen to your doctor, you idiot? You can't go around exacerbating your injuries, or they'll just get worse." He bent down next to her, picking her up in a somewhat uncomfortable bridal carry. She squirmed in his grip for a second before resigning herself to her fate after he glared at her. "Yeah, I was chasing down signs of one of the guys from our attack earlier, but he got away, haha." He scowled. "Don't go around wasting your time. You know that you can't last long on your own. Get help from somebody if you do something like this. I'm sure the boar is tearing himself to pieces in his room right now, so you wouldn't even be waking him." She waved her hands, babbling, I can't bother the king with something like this. It wouldn't be dash. But because you didn't, we lost a valuable hostage, and we could have lost you, too. If you are not careful in the future, we could lose a lot more. You have to remember your limits before you get someone else hurt. He snapped, and her teeth clicked as she snapped her mouth shut. I'm sorry, she forced out through clenched teeth. Felix just scoffed. Don't apologize to me. I won't offer you any sympathy or forgiveness until you start learning to rely on us more. And you're telling the boar what you did. I'm not speaking for you. She pouted. Felix, can't you just dash? No. Puppy dog eyes don't work on me, so don't bother trying. She considered pushing his buttons more, but eventually just dropped it. The training grounds were on the near opposite side of camp from her tent, but that wasn't where Felix was headed. Instead, he seemed to be headed for the infirmary. What were you doing on the training grounds so late at night? She asked instead of continuing her previous line of thought. Some of us like to be on top of our sword skills, something I wish I could say the same about Sylvain. Hey, Sylvain's good at other stuff. Good at being a nuisance. I can't remember the last time I saw that idiot in the training grounds on his own free will. Ingrid does drag him there a lot. Of course she does. She cares about that fool more than she should. I don't understand why she hasn't given up on him by now. Shay tilted her head at Felix. His opinion on Sylvain seemed unusually low today. It was a bit out of character, honestly. Did something happen between you two? You and Sylvain, that is. Felix scowled. Nothing more than usual. He flirts with all the wrong women. I thought he was finally getting somewhere until I caught him chatting up some of the citizens we rescued earlier today. She sighed. That sounds like Sylvain, all right. I've only been mostly free of it. Felix huffed. The only other woman that fool doesn't flirt with is Ingrid, and that's because he knows better. He'd go after a tree if it had a hole, but he at least knows how to treat her with respect. He doesn't flirt with you because you'll kick his ass. She decided not to press this subject any further just in time, too, because they had reached the infirmary. Felix pushed his way past the cloth hanging over the doorway, the chill of the Faerghus winters allowing for nothing lesser in order to preserve warmth. Mercedes. Felix called out, and after a short moment and a little bit of bustle, a very worn-out woman pushed her head through another curtain. Felix, it is the middle of the night, please do try to be more oh my. Shay made eye contact with Mercedes, and could only manage an ashamed wave. She left to go chase a lead after our fight, all on her own. Found her passed out in the training grounds. Felix grunted, following Mercedes as she directed him to a bed. When Shay was finally let down onto a soft surface, she felt like crying again, this time out of relief rather than humiliation. At the training grounds, Felix, are you still unable to sleep? Do you need a draft? I can prepare something light for you, if you'd like. Mercedes' voice was as sweet as a summer bell, but Felix still stiffened at her words. I'll be fine. Just take care of her and get some rest. You look exhausted. Mercedes just smiled and shooed him out of the tent. Felix did so, grumbling all the while. As she rounded back on Shay, she could see what he meant. Mercedes really did look exhausted. She'd likely been working all day, and Shay could see a pile of discarded tomes in the corner of the infirmary. I'm sorry about all this. I just dash. Mercedes interrupted her, a soft smile on her face. It's all right. I'm just glad you're safe. Felix is, too, even if he's too grumpy to show it. Shay glanced off to the side guiltily as Mercedes procured a tome and started hovering over her midsection. A few excruciating minutes later, and the checkup was done. You should be all right, Shay. Just take it easy for the next few days. No getting on any flying animals, no horse riding, no jogging. Get in the back of a carriage when we travel, and I mean that, or you won't be able to walk at all at this rate. Mercedes lightly scolded her. Shay just nodded, already feeling sleepy. Mercedes frowned down at her as her eyelids drooped. Rest well. Call for me if you ever need anything. Mercedes' voice was soft, sweet, and motherly, and as a blanket was pulled up to her chin, she could imagine that it truly was her mother, if only for a short moment. Check the description for the links to the author.